London, 1845. The delicate porcelain teacup trembled in Genevieve Caldwell's hand as she stared at the letter bearing her father's seal. Around her, the morning light streamed through the tall windows of Thornfield Manor's breakfast room, illuminating the fine furniture and elegant paintings that had been part of her life for all of her 22 years. Yet in that moment, every familiar comfort seemed to fade into insignificance. "Genevieve," her mother's voice cut through her thoughts. "What does your father say? When shall we expect him home from London?" Genevieve swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the crisp parchment. "He isn't coming home, Mother." Lady Caldwell set down her own teacup with a gentle clink. "Whatever do you mean, dear?" "Father has lost everything." The words felt foreign on Genevieve's tongue. "The railway investments. They've failed completely. Thornfield is to be sold to pay the debts." Her mother's face drained of colour. "That cannot be. Your father would never risk Thornfield. It has been in his family for generations." "He did risk it, Mother. And now it's gone," Genevieve's voice caught. "We have 3 weeks to vacate." The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, a sound that had always represented stability and order in Genevieve's world. Now each tick seemed to count down the moments until their downfall. Lady Caldwell drew herself up, years of aristocratic breeding lending her composure even in catastrophe. "What else does he say?" "Surely he has made some arrangements for us." "He has gone to Liverpool to secure passage to America. He believes he can rebuild his fortune there." Genevieve's hands shook as she folded the letter. "He wants us to join him once he's established." "America," Lady Caldwell whispered, horrified. "But that's practically wilderness." Genevieve rose from her chair and moved to the window. The estate gardens stretched before her, roses her grandmother had planted, paths she had walked since childhood, the oak tree where her father had built her a swing when she was 6, all to be taken from them. "He mentions an alternative," she said quietly, "for me at least." Her mother looked up sharply. "What alternative?" "Lord Thistlewick has apparently expressed interest in my hand. Father suggests I consider it seriously, as it would secure my future at least." "Lord Thistlewick, the Duke of Westmoreland's son." Lady Caldwell's expression shifted from despair to calculation. "He is considerably older, but his fortune is substantial, and the connection to the Duke's family would be advantageous." "He is 35 years my senior, Mother," Genevieve said flatly, "and has buried 2 wives already. Many young women would consider it a privilege to make such a match." Genevieve turned back to the garden view. "And what of you? Would you come to America with Father, or—" "I shall go to my sister in Bath," Lady Caldwell replied promptly. "Arrangements can be made. Your father has clearly made his choice without consulting me. I shall make mine." The resignation in her mother's voice confirmed what Genevieve had always suspected, but never acknowledged. Theirs had been a marriage of convenience, not passion. Her parents had inhabited the same house for decades without truly sharing a life. "Is that what marriage is, then?" Genevieve asked softly. "A business arrangement? A way to secure position and fortune?" Lady Caldwell sighed. "For women of our standing, marriage is our profession, Genevieve. Love is a luxury few can afford. Your father and I had a perfectly respectable union. Yet you will not follow him now. As he did not consult me in our ruination, I need not consult him in my response to it." Her mother smoothed her skirts. "You would do well to accept Lord Thistlewick's offer. It is the sensible choice." "Sensible?" The word echoed in Genevieve's mind as she gazed out at the gardens that would soon belong to strangers. She had been raised to be sensible, to understand that her purpose was to make an advantageous match, to uphold her family's standing, to be the perfect ornament in a gentleman's home. She had believed it all her life. Why then did the prospect of Lord Thistlewick's proposal fill her with such dread? "I will consider it," she said at last, though inside, a small voice whispered that there must be another way. As the days passed, the reality of their situation became painfully apparent. Creditors arrived. Inventories were taken. Servants who had been with the family for decades were given notice, many departing with tears in their eyes. Genevieve's childhood home was dismantled piece by piece. Through it all, she maintained the composure expected of a lady, even as she sorted through her possessions, deciding what few items she could keep and what must be sold. Her mother retreated further into cold dignity, making arrangements for her own departure to Bath, while Genevieve delayed responding to Lord Thistlewick's increasingly insistent letters. 1 week before they were to leave Thornfield forever, a letter arrived from her cousin Charlotte in London. "My dear Genevieve," it read, "I was devastated to hear of your family's misfortune. Aunt Margaret's letter reached me yesterday, and I immediately spoke with Edward. We insist that you must come to London and stay with us. I won't hear of you sacrificing yourself to that dreadful old Lord Thistlewick. Edward has connections who might help your father, and meanwhile you shall have a proper season. You are too lovely and accomplished to be hidden away in the country, or worse, in some American frontier town. The little season is just beginning. Say you'll come, dearest, your loving cousin, Charlotte." Genevieve read the letter twice, hope flickering to life for the first time since her father's devastating news. Charlotte had married well the previous year to Edward Harrington, a prosperous merchant with social ambitions. While the Harringtons were not part of the aristocracy, they moved in respectable circles and were known for their lavish entertainments. "Mother," Genevieve said that evening as they dined in the nearly empty dining room, their voices echoing in the cavernous space. "I've had a letter from Charlotte. She has invited me to stay with her in London." Lady Caldwell frowned. "The Harringtons, I'm not sure that's appropriate. They're in trade, after all." "They're well established in London society," Genevieve countered. "And Charlotte says Edward might be able to help father with his American ventures." "And what of Lord Thistlewick?" Genevieve set down her fork. "I do not wish to marry Lord Thistlewick." "It isn't a question of what you wish, Genevieve. It's a question of what's possible. Without a dowry, your prospects are severely limited. Charlotte believes I might make a match in London." Lady Caldwell gave a bitter laugh. "Based on what, your pretty face? The ton will know of our disgrace before you even arrive. No respectable family will align themselves with the daughter of a ruined man." "Then I shall be a companion or a governess," Genevieve said with more conviction than she felt. "Anything would be preferable to being the third wife of a man who could be my grandfather." Her mother studied her for a long moment. "You have always been stubborn, Genevieve, just like your father. Look where his stubbornness has led us." "I am not my father, and I refuse to believe that my only value lies in the advantageous match I might make." Genevieve stood. "I am going to London. I leave in 3 days." Lady Caldwell sighed. "Then you go without my blessing." "So be it." 3 days later, Genevieve stood at the carriage window, watching Thornfield Manor grow smaller in the distance. The great house where generations of Caldwells had lived and died would soon belong to Mr. Harold Finch, a manufacturer from Manchester who had made his fortune in textiles. The thought of his family sleeping in her rooms, walking her gardens, hanging their paintings over the marks left by her family portraits was almost unbearable. As the carriage crested the hill and Thornfield disappeared from view, Genevieve allowed herself one quiet sob before straightening her shoulders. She was a Caldwell. Whatever else was lost, she still had her name, her education, and her determination. In London, she would remake herself. She would not end up like her mother, trapped in a loveless marriage for the sake of security. Love and security, she had been taught, were mutually exclusive luxuries for women of her station. One could have one or the other, never both. It was a truth she had accepted all her life. But as the countryside rolled past and London drew nearer, Genevieve found herself questioning it for the first time. 4 days later, she arrived at the Harringtons' elegant townhouse in Mayfair, exhausted from the journey but filled with nervous anticipation. Charlotte greeted her with warm embraces and effusive sympathy, ushering her into a well-appointed guest chamber that, while smaller than her room at Thornfield, was decorated with every consideration for comfort. "You poor dear," Charlotte said, sitting beside Genevieve on the bed. "To lose everything so suddenly, but you mustn't worry. Edward and I will see you properly established." "You're very kind, Charlotte," Genevieve replied, removing her travel bonnet. "But I don't expect miracles. Mother made it quite clear that my prospects are limited without a dowry. Charlotte waved her hand dismissively. Aunt Margaret always was a pessimist. There are plenty of gentlemen in London who value more than a dowry. Why, look at me. Edward married me for love, not for my modest fortune. Genevieve smiled weakly. Charlotte had always been pretty and vivacious, the sort of girl who attracted attention without effort. Genevieve, with her quieter demeanor and bookish tendencies, had never found it so easy to charm. In any case, Charlotte continued, you've arrived at the perfect time. The Duchess of Westmoreland is hosting a ball tomorrow night, and Edward has secured invitations. Half the eligible bachelors in London will be there. Genevieve's heart sank. Westmoreland, but that's Lord Thistlewick's family. His father is the Duke. Oh, Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth. I hadn't considered. But surely the old lord won't be there. He rarely leaves his estate, from what I hear, and even if he is, you'll be under our protection. He can hardly press his suit in the middle of a ballroom. Genevieve wasn't so certain, but she nodded anyway. What shall I wear? Most of my gowns were sold. We're nearly the same size, Charlotte declared, standing and moving to a large wardrobe. I have just the thing, a pale blue silk that will be divine with your colouring. We'll have my ladies' maid make any necessary adjustments today. As Charlotte pulled out gown after gown, chattering about the latest London fashions and which colours would suit Genevieve best, a strange sense of unreality washed over her. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been the daughter of a respected country gentleman, secure in her position and future. Now she was essentially penniless, dependent on the charity of relatives, preparing to enter society under false pretenses. For despite Charlotte's optimism, Genevieve harboured no illusions. Once word of her father's disgrace spread, she would be viewed as damaged goods. Without fortune or powerful connections, her value in the marriage market was negligible. The best she could hope for was to make herself useful enough to the Harringtons that they would continue to support her, until she could find employment as a companion or governess. The thought of spending her life in genteel servitude was dispiriting, but still preferable to marriage to Lord Thistlewick. She would adapt, she would survive, she had no other choice. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the distant sounds of London traffic, Genevieve made a vow to herself. She would never again place her fate in another's hands. She would find a way to support herself, to live with dignity if not luxury. And she would never, ever marry without true affection, no matter how practical such a union might be. It was a naive promise, perhaps. But in the darkness of a strange room, far from everything she had ever known, it felt like the only truth she could cling to. The next evening found Genevieve standing at the entrance to the Duchess of Westmoreland's ballroom, her heart hammering against her ribs. Charlotte's pale blue silk gown had been altered to fit her perfectly. Her hair had been arranged in an elegant style by Charlotte's lady's maid, and Edward had provided a simple pearl necklace that lent her the appearance of propriety without ostentation. "You look lovely," Charlotte whispered, squeezing her arm. "Just remember to smile and not to refuse any gentleman who asks you to dance. The first impression is everything." Genevieve nodded, her mouth dry. The ballroom was a blaze of light and colour, chandeliers casting their golden glow over ladies in vibrant silks and gentlemen in impeccable evening dress. The orchestra played a lively tune, and dozens of couples whirled across the polished floor. It was exactly the sort of scene she had imagined during long country evenings, reading novels by the fire at Thornfield. Now that she was here, however, she felt acutely out of place. These people, with their easy laughter and confident bearing, belonged to a world she had only glimpsed from afar. They would sense her uncertainty, her desperation, like wolves scenting weakness in a fawn. "Come," Edward said, offering his arm. "Let me introduce you to our hosts." As they made their way through the crowd, Genevieve caught fragments of conversation, glimpses of speculative glances. She kept her chin up, her expression composed, as Edward guided them toward an elegant older woman holding court near the refreshment table. "Your Grace," Edward said with a bow, "may I present my wife's cousin, Miss Genevieve Caldwell? She is visiting us from Derbyshire." The Duchess of Westmoreland, a striking woman with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes, inclined her head slightly. "Miss Caldwell, How delightful to have new blood at our little gathering. I trust you find London agreeable. Very much so, Your Grace, Genevieve replied, executing a perfect curtsy. Your home is magnificent, and your hospitality most gracious. The Duchess's lips curved in a small smile. Well spoken, Miss Caldwell. Tell me, are you acquainted with my son, Lord Thistlewick? I believe he mentioned some connection to the Caldwells of Derbyshire. Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. Aye, that is. Ah, there you are, mother. A reedy voice interrupted, and Genevieve turned to find herself face to face with Lord Thistlewick himself. He was precisely as she remembered from their brief meeting the previous year, tall and painfully thin, with watery blue eyes and a perpetual expression of mild distaste. At 60, he was not an ill-looking man, but there was something in his gaze that made Genevieve's skin crawl. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized her. Miss Caldwell, what an unexpected pleasure. I had thought you still in Derbyshire. Lord Thistlewick, Genevieve managed, cursing inwardly at her misfortune. How do you do? You know each other, then? The Duchess inquired, her keen gaze moving between them. Indeed, mother, Mr. Caldwell and I have had some correspondence regarding his daughter. Lord Thistlewick's thin lips curled in what might have been intended as a smile. I had not expected to find Miss Caldwell in London, however. Charlotte stepped forward, her normally sunny expression hardening. My cousin is staying with us for the season, my lord. We simply couldn't bear to be parted from her any longer. Lord Thistlewick's eyes narrowed slightly. How fortunate for her, and for society to be graced with such a charming addition. He turned to Genevieve. Perhaps you will honour me with a dance, Miss Caldwell. I believe the next set is a quadrille. Trapped by propriety and the watchful gaze of the Duchess, Genevieve could only nod. Of course, my lord. As Lord Thistlewick led her toward the dance floor, she caught Charlotte's sympathetic glance and Edward's concerned frown. The evening had barely begun, and already her worst fear had materialized. Lord Thistlewick would surely mention her father's disgrace, perhaps even press his suit publicly. By the end of the night, every person in the ballroom would know of the Caldwells' fall from grace. You look pale, Miss Caldwell, Lord Thistlewick commented as they took their places for the quadrille. The journey from Derbyshire must have been taxing. Not at all, she replied stiffly. I am in excellent health. I'm relieved to hear it. A robust constitution is essential in a wife, particularly for bearing sons. Genevieve nearly missed a step at his bluntness. You presume a great deal, my lord. Do I? Your father seemed to think otherwise in his last letter. The music swelled, and they were temporarily separated by the patterns of the dance. When they came together again, Genevieve found her voice. My father's circumstances have changed, as I'm sure you're aware. Any arrangement he might have contemplated is no longer viable. Lord Thistlewick's smile didn't reach his eyes. On the contrary, Miss Caldwell, your changed circumstances make our union more logical than ever. You have no dowry, no prospects, and a ruined family name. I offer security, position, and the protection of the Westmoreland influence. It's a most equitable exchange. The cold calculation in his voice made Genevieve's stomach turn. And what of compatibility, my lord, of mutual respect and affection? He laughed softly. Those are the fanciful notions of novels and poetry, Miss Caldwell. Marriage is a practical institution. My previous wives understood this perfectly. And yet they both died young, Genevieve said before she could stop herself. Lord Thistlewick's expression hardened. A lady should guard her tongue more carefully, Miss Caldwell. Especially one in your precarious position. The dance separated them again, giving Genevieve a moment to collect herself. She had been reckless to antagonize him, but something in his presumption, his dismissal of her feelings, had awakened a fierce resistance. She would rather face poverty, exile, or even disgrace than tie herself to this cold, calculating man. As the quadrille ended, Lord Thistlewick bowed stiffly. I shall call upon you tomorrow at the Harringtons, Miss Caldwell. We have much to discuss regarding our future. Before she could form a suitably polite but definitive rejection, he had turned and walked away, leaving Genevieve standing alone at the edge of the dance floor. She took a deep breath, fighting the urge to flee the ballroom entirely. Eyes were already upon her, curious, speculative, perhaps even pitying. The tongue was skilled at detecting vulnerability, and she was displaying it for all to see. She straightened her shoulders and made her way toward a relatively quiet corner, hoping to compose herself before rejoining Charlotte and Edward. She needed time to think, to plan her next move. Lord Thistlewick would not be easily dissuaded, especially now that he knew the full extent of her desperation. "You appear to be in need of rescue, Miss Caldwell." The deep, unfamiliar voice startled her. Genevieve turned to find herself looking up into the face of a tall, broad-shouldered gentleman with dark hair and remarkable amber eyes. He was perhaps 30, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to command, tempered by a slight smile that suggested good humor. "I beg your pardon," she said, flustered by his directness. "Have we been introduced?" "Not formally, no," he bowed slightly. "Yardley Thornton at your service. And you are Miss Genevieve Caldwell, newly arrived from Derbyshire, if the whispers are to be believed." "Whispers already," Genevieve sighed. "London society works quickly." "Don't be alarmed, it's merely that a new face, especially one as striking as yours, naturally attracts attention." His eyes, warm and direct, held none of the calculation she'd seen in Lord Thistlewick's. "I happened to observe your quadrille with Lord Thistlewick. You seemed uncomfortable." Genevieve hesitated. This man was a stranger, and she had already been indiscreet once tonight, yet something in his expression invited confidence. "Lord Thistlewick has certain expectations that I cannot fulfill," she said carefully. "Ah," his expression revealed understanding. "He is a persistent man, I'm told, not accustomed to disappointment." "No," Genevieve agreed. "I fear he will not be easily discouraged." "Then perhaps a strategic alliance is in order." Mr. Thornton glanced toward the dance floor, where another set was forming. "The next dance is a waltz. If you were engaged with another partner, Lord Thistlewick would be unable to monopolize your attention further this evening." Genevieve studied him uncertainly. "Are you offering to be that partner, Mr. Thornton?" "I am," he extended his hand. "Unless you find the prospect more alarming than Lord Thistlewick's company." Despite herself, Genevieve smiled. "When you put it that way, sir, I can hardly refuse." His answering smile transformed his face, lending it a boyish charm at odds with his imposing stature. "Excellent, shall we?" As Mr. Thornton led her onto the dance floor, Genevieve was acutely aware of the eyes following them. The waltz was still considered somewhat scandalous in conservative circles, its hold more intimate than traditional country dances. For an unmarried lady to waltz with a gentleman to whom she had just been introduced was bordering on impropriety. Yet as the music began, and Mr. Thornton's hand settled respectfully at her waist, Genevieve found herself caring less about propriety than she ever had before. His touch was light but secure, his steps confident as he guided her into the swirling pattern of the dance. "You dance beautifully, Miss Caldwell," he remarked as they moved among the other couples. "Thank you. Though I fear my country manners must seem provincial compared to London refinement. On the contrary, there's a refreshing authenticity in your manner that many London ladies lack." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "May I ask what brings you to town? The season has barely begun." Genevieve tensed slightly. Here it was, the inevitable question about her circumstances. Should she offer a polite fiction or risk the truth? "Circumstances at home have changed," she said carefully. "I am staying with my cousin Mrs. Harrington for the foreseeable future." Mr. Thornton nodded, not pressing further. "Mrs. Harrington is well regarded. Her husband's shipping business has been remarkably successful. You know the Harringtons well. Edward and I have had some business dealings. He's a fair man, shrewd but honest, rare qualities in the commercial world." They turned in a tight circle, and Genevieve caught a glimpse of Lord Thistlewick watching them from across the room, his expression sour. The sight gave her a small, vindictive satisfaction. "I must thank you, Mr. Thornton," she said, returning her attention to her partner. "Your timely intervention has spared me considerable discomfort." "Happy to be of service." He guided her through another turn, though I admit my motives weren't entirely altruistic. I had noticed you earlier and was seeking an opportunity to make your acquaintance." Genevieve felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "You flatter me, sir." "Not at all, simply stating fact." His direct gaze held hers. "London ballrooms are filled with ladies trained to be identical in manner, conversation, and appearance. You stand apart." "I'm not sure that's a compliment," she replied, though she couldn't help but smile. "Standing apart is rarely advantageous for a lady." "Perhaps not, but it is infinitely more interesting." He lowered his voice slightly. "Tell me, Miss Caldwell, what do you think of Wordsworth's latest publication?" The question surprised her. "You're familiar with Wordsworth, Mr. Thornton." "I am, though I confess a preference for Byron's earlier works. There's a raw honesty in them that speaks to me." "While I find Wordsworth's connection to nature more compelling," Genevieve replied, delighted by the unexpected turn in conversation. "Though I agree about Byron's honesty, too many poets obscure genuine feeling behind florid language." Mr. Thornton's smile deepened. "Precisely my thought. You're well read, Miss Caldwell." "My father's library was extensive." The reminder of Thornfield and all she had lost dampened her momentary happiness. Mr. Thornton seemed to sense the change in her mood. "I've upset you. My apologies." "Not at all, it's only that." She hesitated. "My father's library now belongs to someone else, as does our home." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "I see. Hence the change in circumstances you mentioned." Genevieve nodded, unable to elaborate further without risking tears. The music was drawing to a close, and their brief interlude would soon end. She was surprised by how much she regretted it. As the final notes sounded, Mr. Thornton guided her to the edge of the dance floor. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Caldwell. It has been a genuine pleasure." "The pleasure was mine, Mr. Thornton," she curtsied as he bowed. "Might I call upon you at the Harringtons, perhaps tomorrow afternoon?" Genevieve hesitated. Lord Thistlewick had also declared his intention to call. The thought of facing him alone was daunting, but the prospect of Mr. Thornton's visit offered a welcome counterbalance. "Yes," she decided, "I would like that very much." His smile was warm. "Until tomorrow, then." As he walked away, Genevieve felt a curious lightness in her chest. For the first time since her father's letter had shattered her world, she found herself looking forward to something. Charlotte appeared at her side, eyes wide with curiosity. "Genevieve Caldwell, who was that magnificent specimen of manhood, and how did you manage to secure a waltz with him within an hour of arriving at your first London ball?" "His name is Mr. Yardley Thornton," Genevieve replied, unable to suppress a smile. "And I didn't secure anything, he asked me." "Yardley Thornton," Charlotte's eyebrows rose dramatically. "The Yardley Thornton, heir to the Thornton shipping empire." I don't know anything about that," Genevieve admitted, startled. "He mentioned knowing Edward through business." Charlotte laughed. "Oh, my dear innocent cousin, knowing Edward through business is rather like saying the Thames passes through London. The Thornton fleet is one of the largest in England. Edward has been trying to secure their partnership for months, and now the heir himself has singled you out." Genevieve frowned. "Surely it's not so remarkable." "He simply took pity on me when he saw Lord Thistlewick making unwanted advances." "Yardley Thornton doesn't do anything out of simple pity," Charlotte declared. "He's known to be extremely selective in his social engagements. Half the eligible ladies in London have set their caps for him, and he's remained steadfastly elusive." She squeezed Genevieve's arm. "This is extraordinary luck, cousin. With his fortune and connections, your future would be secured. And he's devastatingly handsome to boot." Genevieve's pleasure in the encounter dimmed somewhat. "You sound like my mother, reducing everything to prospects and advantages." "I'm merely being practical, dear." "A lady without fortune must be practical." Charlotte's expression softened. "Though I must say, he seemed genuinely captivated by you, the way he looked at you during that waltz." "Well, it wasn't merely practical interest, let's leave it at that." Before Genevieve could respond, Edward approached, looking concerned. There you are, I've been looking everywhere. Lord Thistlewick has been making inquiries about your situation, Genevieve, rather pointed ones. I fear your family's circumstances may become common knowledge very soon. Genevieve's stomach clenched. I suspected as much. He made his intentions quite clear during our dance. We should leave, Charlotte said, glancing around, before the gossip spreads further. Edward nodded. I've already called for the carriage. As they made their way through the crowd toward the exit, Genevieve felt eyes upon her, curious, speculative, already judgmental. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Genevieve Caldwell's father was ruined, that Thornfield Manor had been sold to a Manchester manufacturer, that the once respectable family had fallen into disgrace. She held her head high, refusing to show the fear and humiliation churning within. Let them whisper, let them judge, she would endure it. Just before they reached the grand staircase, she caught a final glimpse of Mr. Thornton across the room. He was watching her departure, his expression unreadable. Genevieve wondered if he, too, would hear the whispers by morning. If he did, would he still call upon her as promised? Or would he, like so many others, distance himself from her disgrace? The question followed her into the carriage and through the dark London streets, haunting her long after she had retired to her borrowed bedchamber in the Harringtons' home. Morning brought the confirmation of Edward's fears. The society papers contained a thinly veiled reference to a once prominent Derbyshire family whose precipitous decline in fortune had led to the sale of their ancestral seat, and the daughter's hasty removal to London in search of salvation through marriage. Though the Caldwells weren't mentioned by name, anyone who had witnessed Lord Thistlewick's attention to Genevieve at the Duchess's ball would make the connection. By noon, callers began to arrive at the Harrington home, not to pay respects to the new arrival, but to satisfy their curiosity about the scandal. Charlotte, to her credit, was fiercely protective, receiving visitors in the drawing room while Genevieve remained upstairs, ostensibly resting from the excitement of the previous evening. Through the floor, Genevieve could hear the murmur of voices, occasionally rising in exclamation or dropping to whispered confidences. Completely ruined, they say. Railway speculation, always risky. The mother gone to Bath, the father fled to America. And the daughter thrown upon the mercy of relatives. Lord Thistlewick apparently still interested, despite everything. Each fragment that reached her was like a small knife, cutting away at her dignity, her pride, her sense of self. By mid-afternoon, she could bear it no longer. Dressing in a simple day gown, another of Charlotte's cast-offs, altered to fit her, she descended to the drawing room during a brief lull in visitors. "Genevieve," Charlotte exclaimed as she entered. "I thought you were resting." "I've rested enough," Genevieve replied, taking a seat near the window. "I cannot hide upstairs forever while London dissects my family's misfortunes." Charlotte looked troubled. "It's been dreadful. These people pretend concern, but they're vultures, feeding on others' misfortunes. I've half a mind to cancel all our engagements for the next fortnight." "You'll do no such thing," Genevieve said firmly. "I won't allow my situation to damage your social standing. Besides, hiding away will only confirm their worst suspicions." "What will you do about Lord Thistlewick?" "He sent a note saying he'll call at 4. Genevieve glanced at the ornate clock on the mantel, just past 3. "I shall receive him politely, but firmly reject any offer he might make. I meant what I said, Charlotte. I would rather work as a governess than marry without affection. And Mr. Thornton, he's also sent a note confirming his intention to call today." Despite everything, Genevieve felt a small flutter in her chest at the mention of his name. So he hadn't been deterred by the morning's gossip. "I shall receive him as well, of course." Charlotte studied her with a knowing smile. "He made quite an impression on you, didn't he? He was kind when others were cruel, that's all." "Is it?" "The way you looked at him during that waltz suggested something more." Genevieve turned to gaze out the window, unwilling to examine the strange effect Mr. Thornton had had on her. "It doesn't signify. Even if I were interested, which I'm not saying I am, a man of his position would never seriously consider a woman in my circumstances." Don't be so certain, Charlotte replied. Yardley Thornton has always been something of an enigma in society. His father built their fortune from nothing, much like Edward, though on a grander scale. They don't have the pedigree of the aristocracy, but their wealth gives them entree to any circle they choose. And Yardley himself is known for his unconventional views. Genevieve was about to ask what Charlotte meant by unconventional, when the butler appeared at the drawing-room door. Lord Thistlewick, madam, he announced, and the thin figure of her unwanted suitor appeared behind him. Lord Thistlewick advanced into the room, his watery eyes fixed on Genevieve with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Miss Caldwell, Mrs. Harrington, how delightful to find you both at home. Charlotte rose, her normally warm expression cooling noticeably. Lord Thistlewick, what an unexpected pleasure. Not entirely unexpected, I think, he replied smoothly. I did send word of my intention to call. So you did, how conscientious of you. Charlotte's voice could have frozen the Thames. Will you take tea? Thank you, yes. He settled himself in a chair opposite Genevieve, his gaze never leaving her face. You look well rested, Miss Caldwell. The evening's exertions don't appear to have taxed you unduly. I am in excellent health, thank you, Genevieve replied stiffly. Good, good. A robust constitution is essential, as I mentioned last night. Charlotte cleared her throat pointedly. I understand your mother's ball was a great success, my lord. The Duchess always hosts the most elegant gatherings. Indeed, Lord Thistlewick accepted the tea Charlotte offered, taking a deliberate sip before continuing. Though there was some unfortunate gossip circulating, something about a family from Derbyshire facing financial ruin, he looked directly at Genevieve, most distressing. Genevieve met his gaze steadily. Gossip is the lifeblood of London society, I'm told. Today's scandal is forgotten when tomorrow's arrives. How philosophical. His thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. Though in this case, I fear the matter won't be so quickly forgotten. Your father's disgrace is rather comprehensive. The sale of Thornfield Manor alone has caused quite a stir in certain circles. Charlotte set down her teacup with a sharp clink. My cousin's family has faced temporary setbacks, Lord Thistlewick. It's hardly unprecedented in these uncertain economic times. Temporary, Lord Thistlewick raised an eyebrow. From what I understand, Mr. Caldwell has fled to America to escape his creditors. Hardly the action of a man expecting to restore his fortune quickly. Genevieve felt anger rising in her chest. My father has gone to America to build a new life, my lord. He has paid his debts with the sale of our estate. There is no disgrace in misfortune bravely faced. Bravely faced, Lord Thistlewick laughed softly. Is that what you call it? Abandoning his family to the mercy of relatives while he chases wild schemes across the Atlantic. My lord, Charlotte interjected sharply, you forget yourself. This is my home, and Genevieve is under my protection. I will not have her father maligned in such a manner. Lord Thistlewick waved a dismissive hand. My apologies, Mrs. Harrington. I speak only out of concern for Miss Caldwell's future. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. He turned back to Genevieve. My offer stands, Miss Caldwell. Despite your changed circumstances, indeed, because of them, I am prepared to make you my wife. The protection of the Westmoreland name would shield you from much of society's censure. Genevieve stared at him, momentarily speechless at his audacity. You present your offer as though it were a charitable act, my lord. Is it not? He countered. Few men in my position would consider a woman without fortune or connections. Yet I see beyond such superficial concerns to the advantages you might bring as my wife. You are well-bred, educated, and of good family, your father's recent disgrace notwithstanding. You would manage my household competently and, God willing, provide me with sons. The cold calculation in his assessment made Genevieve physically recoil. And what of affection, my lord? Of mutual respect and companionship, do these considerations not enter into your calculations? Lord Thistlewick frowned slightly. I see your time in London has already infected you with romantic notions, Miss Caldwell. Marriage is a practical institution, not a sentimental one. My previous wives understood this perfectly. Yes, you mentioned that last night, Genevieve replied, her voice hardening. And yet both died young, one might wonder why. A tense silence followed her words. Charlotte looked alarmed, while Lord Thistlewick's expression darkened dangerously. You would do well to guard your tongue, Miss Caldwell, he said softly. A lady in your position cannot afford such impertinence. Without my offer, what future awaits you? Dependence on the charity of relatives, employment as a governess to strangers' children. Or perhaps following your father to the wilds of America, he leaned forward. Consider your answer carefully. My patience is not unlimited. Genevieve rose to her feet, trembling with suppressed fury. Then allow me to spare you further exercise of that limited patience, my lord. I decline your offer. I would rather face any of the fates you describe than bind myself to a man who sees marriage as a cold business transaction. Lord Thistlewick's face flushed with anger. You refuse me, after the disgrace your family has brought upon its name. I do, Genevieve lifted her chin. My family's misfortune does not oblige me to sacrifice my happiness to the first man who condescends to offer marriage. He stood abruptly, his thin frame vibrating with rage. You will regret this decision, Miss Caldwell. I have influence in circles you cannot imagine. By the time I am finished, no respectable family in London will receive you. No gentleman of standing will offer for you. You will be as ruined as your father. Charlotte rose as well, her voice icy. That is quite enough, Lord Thistlewick. I must ask you to leave my home immediately. Gladly, Mrs. Harrington. He gave a stiff bow, though you might consider the wisdom of harboring a young woman who so recklessly disregards her own interests. Her disgrace may well taint your family by association. With that parting shot, he strode from the room, not waiting for the butler to show him out. The front door slammed moments later, its echo seeming to reverberate through the suddenly silent house. Charlotte sank back into her chair, her face pale. Oh, Genevieve, what have you done? He is not a man to cross lightly. I could not accept him, Charlotte, not even to save myself from ruin. Genevieve's legs trembled, and she sat down heavily. The way he spoke of marriage, of his previous wives, there was something chilling in it. I would rather face poverty than spend my life with such a man. But his threats, Charlotte twisted her handkerchief anxiously. The Westmorlands have tremendous influence, if he truly sets out to ruin your reputation. What reputation remains to me? Genevieve asked bitterly. My father is disgraced, our family name tarnished. Lord Thistlewick can hardly damage what is already broken. The butler appeared at the door again, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Yardley Thornton, madam. Charlotte's eyes widened. Oh. Show him in, Jenkins. She turned to Genevieve. Are you composed enough to receive him? We could send word that you're indisposed. No, Genevieve said, straightening her shoulders. I will not hide. A moment later, Mr. Thornton entered the drawing room, his tall figure making the space seem suddenly smaller. He was dressed more casually than the previous evening, in a well-cut frock coat of deep green that complemented his dark colouring. His expression brightened visibly when he saw Genevieve. Miss Caldwell, Mrs. Harrington, he bowed to each of them in turn. I trust I find you well. As well as can be expected, Mr. Thornton, Charlotte replied, rising to greet him, though I fear you've arrived at a somewhat awkward moment. Lord Thistlewick has just departed, and not in the best of tempers. Mr. Thornton's warm eyes flickered to Genevieve, concern evident in their depths. I see. I hope his visit was not too distressing. It was. Enlightening, Genevieve said carefully. Charlotte glanced between them, then made a show of consulting the clock. Oh, I've just remembered an urgent matter I must discuss with the housekeeper. Would you excuse me for a few moments, Mr. Thornton? Jenkins will bring fresh tea, and Genevieve will entertain you until I return. Before either could protest, she had swept from the room, leaving them alone save for the watchful presence of the butler, who indeed appeared moments later with a fresh tea service before withdrawing to stand discreetly by the door. Your cousin is not subtle in her matchmaking, Mr. Thornton observed with a slight smile as he took the seat Lord Thistlewick had vacated. Genevieve felt a blush rise to her cheeks. I apologize for her transparency. Charlotte has a generous heart, but little guile. No apology necessary. I find it refreshing. He accepted the cup of tea she offered, though I am concerned about Lord Thistlewick's visit. You seem troubled. Genevieve hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. Mr. Thornton was still essentially a stranger, despite the curious connection she had felt during their waltz. Lord Thistlewick made an offer of marriage, she said finally. I declined. He did not take the rejection well. Mr. Thornton's eyebrows rose. I see. That explains his expression when I passed him on the street. I thought he might strike me with his walking stick. He made certain threats regarding my standing in society. Genevieve continued, finding that she wanted this man to understand her situation fully. Though, as I told my cousin, he can hardly damage a reputation already compromised by my father's misfortunes. Mr. Thornton set down his teacup, his expression serious. You refer to the situation mentioned in this morning's papers, about the Derbyshire family. Yes, Genevieve met his gaze directly. My father invested heavily in railway ventures that failed. Our family estate has been sold to pay his debts. He has gone to America to rebuild, while she gestured vaguely, I am dependent on my cousin's generosity until I can secure employment as a governess or companion. I see, Mr. Thornton's expression remained thoughtful, but showed none of the judgment or pity she had feared. And Lord Thistlewick saw your changed circumstances as an opportunity to press his suit. Precisely. Genevieve couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. He presented his offer as a charitable act, emphasizing how few men in his position would consider a woman without fortune or connections. How magnanimous of him, Mr. Thornton said dryly. And yet you refused. I did. May I ask why? Many women in your position would consider his title and fortune adequate compensation for his less appealing qualities. Genevieve studied him, trying to discern whether he was testing her or genuinely curious. His expression revealed nothing but sincere interest. Because I could not bear to be purchased, she said finally. Lord Thistlewick spoke of marriage as a business transaction, my breeding and potential for bearing sons in exchange for his name and protection. There was no mention of respect, of affection, of building a life together. I would rather face poverty than bind myself to a man who views me as an acquisition rather than a partner. Something flared in Mr. Thornton's amber eyes. Approval, admiration, perhaps even something deeper. A principled stance, Miss Caldwell, one that I respect immensely. Even if it's impractical. Especially then, he smiled. Principles that cost us nothing are hardly worth holding. Genevieve found herself returning his smile, a weight lifting from her chest. You're very kind, Mr. Thornton, though I fear Lord Thistlewick will make good on his threats to damage what remains of my standing in London society. Let him try, Mr. Thornton said, with unexpected steel in his voice. The Westmorlands have influence, yes, but they are not the only powerful family in London, and Lord Thistlewick has made enemies of his own over the years. You speak as though you would defend me, Genevieve said, startled by his vehemence. I would, his gaze held her steadily, if you would permit it. The directness of his statement, the quiet conviction behind it, sent a tremor through Genevieve. No man had ever spoken to her in such a manner, as though her consent mattered, as though she were worthy of defense despite her family's disgrace. Why, she asked simply, you hardly know me. Mr. Thornton considered the question seriously. Because in the brief time we've spent together, I've glimpsed qualities that intrigue me deeply: intelligence, courage, principle. A refusal to be defined by circumstance or others' expectations. He paused. And because when we danced last night something resonated between us, did you not feel it? Genevieve's breath caught. The proper response would be to deny it, to maintain the polite fiction that their waltz had been nothing more than a social obligation. But she was tired of proper responses, of the carefully constructed lies that formed the foundation of society. I did feel it, she admitted softly, though I cannot explain it. His smile deepened, transforming his serious face. Nor can I, but I would like to explore it further, if you're willing. The butler cleared his throat discreetly, reminding them of his presence. Genevieve straightened, suddenly aware of how intimate their conversation had become. Perhaps we might continue this discussion another time, she suggested, her voice steadier than she felt. Charlotte has arranged a small dinner party tomorrow evening. Would you care to join us? I would be delighted, Mr. Thornton replied, though I hope we might speak again before then. Would you consider accompanying me for a drive in the park tomorrow afternoon, with your cousin as chaperone, of course? Yes, Genevieve said, surprising herself with the immediacy of her response. I would like that very much. As Mr. Thornton rose to take his leave, promising to return the following afternoon, Genevieve found herself experiencing an emotion she had thought lost forever in the ruins of her family's fortune. Hope. Not for security or status restored, but for something more profound, the possibility of a connection based on mutual respect and genuine affection. It was a fragile hope, easily crushed by the realities of her situation. But as she watched Mr. Thornton's carriage depart from the Harringtons' front window, she allowed herself to nurture it, if only for a moment. The next day dawned bright and clear, a rarity in London's normally grey spring. Genevieve woke early, her dreams having been filled with fragments of the previous day's conversations. Lord Thistlewick's cold assessment, Mr. Thornton's warm gaze, the startling honesty of their exchange. Charlotte was practically vibrating with excitement as they prepared for the afternoon drive. Yardley Thornton, taking you for a drive in the park. Do you realize what a stir this will cause? He never shows particular attention to any lady. The gossips will be beside themselves. Perhaps that's not a good thing, Genevieve said, suddenly anxious. After Lord Thistlewick's threats, drawing more attention to myself might be unwise. Nonsense, being seen with Mr. Thornton is the best possible counter to Lord Thistlewick's influence. The Thorntons may not have a title, but their wealth and connections are formidable. If Yardley Thornton publicly shows his interest in you, it will neutralize much of what Lord Thistlewick might do. You speak as though Mr. Thornton has declared some serious intention, Genevieve protested. He's merely being kind to a lady in difficult circumstances. Charlotte gave her a knowing look. Men like Yardley Thornton don't offer mere kindness to young ladies, Genevieve. Not in the form of private visits and drives in the park. He's interested in you, and not out of pity. Genevieve turned away to hide the blush rising in her cheeks. She couldn't deny the flutter of excitement she felt at the thought of seeing Mr. Thornton again. Their conversation the previous day had awakened something in her, a sense of possibility, of connection that went beyond the superficial exchanges of the ballroom. But she was also practical enough to recognize the vast gulf between their positions. Mr. Thornton was heir to one of London's largest shipping fortunes. She was the penniless daughter of a disgraced man. Whatever interest he might show, whatever connection they might feel, society would view any serious attachment between them as inappropriate at best, scandalous at worst. Mr. Thornton arrived precisely at the appointed hour, driving a handsome curricle pulled by a matched pair of bays. He helped Genevieve and Charlotte into the carriage with easy grace, his hand lingering on Genevieve's a moment longer than strictly necessary. You look lovely, Miss Caldwell, he said quietly, his eyes taking in her borrowed bonnet and pelisse. Blue suits you admirably. Thank you, she replied, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his approval. It's a perfect day for a drive. Indeed, he took up the reins. I thought we might go to Hyde Park. The spring blooms are particularly fine this year. As they set off, Genevieve was acutely conscious of the glances directed their way, curious, speculative, some openly disapproving. Charlotte had been right. Their appearance together was causing a stir. Whether that would work to her advantage or merely add fuel to the fire of gossip remained to be seen. Hyde Park was crowded with the fashionable set taking their afternoon constitutional. Carriages lined the main drives, ladies and gentlemen on horseback trotted along the row, and well-dressed pedestrians strolled the pathways. All the while, the complex social dance of London society played out, greetings exchanged, rivalries displayed through subtle snubs, alliances formed through public acknowledgements. As Mr. Thornton guided his curricle through the park, Genevieve noticed that many carriages slowed as they passed, their occupants openly studying the trio. She kept her chin up, her expression composed, though inside she felt like a specimen under glass. "You bear scrutiny well, Miss Caldwell," Mr. Thornton remarked, noticing her poise. "Most young ladies would be discomforted by such attention." "I've had some practice recently," she replied wryly. "Being the subject of gossip tends to develop one's fortitude." He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that drew even more stares. "So it does, though I suspect you possessed considerable fortitude long before your current troubles." Charlotte, seated on Genevieve's other side, gave a small cough. "Oh look, there's Lady Pembroke with her daughters. Should we stop and greet them, Mr. Thornton? They're particularly good friends of mine." Genevieve recognized the maneuver for what it was: Charlotte's attempt to publicly align Genevieve with respected members of society. Before Mr. Thornton could respond, however, the Pembroke carriage veered away, Lady Pembroke's face set in deliberate disregard. Charlotte's expression fell. "How odd, they must not have seen us." "I think they saw us perfectly well," Genevieve said quietly. "It appears Lord Thistlewick has wasted no time in making good on his threats." Mr. Thornton's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice light. "Lady Pembroke's opinion is hardly worth concerning ourselves with. Her influence extends only to a small circle of equally narrow-minded individuals." "Perhaps," Charlotte said doubtfully, "but she's typically been most cordial. For her to cut us directly is a reflection on her character, not yours, Mr." Thornton finished firmly. He guided the curricle toward a less crowded path. "In any case, I didn't bring you to the park to parade you before society's matrons. There's a particularly lovely spot near the Serpentine that I thought you might enjoy." As they moved away from the main thoroughfare, the atmosphere lightened considerably. The Serpentine glittered in the afternoon sun, swans gliding serenely across its surface. Mr. Thornton found a quiet spot beneath a flowering cherry tree and brought the curricle to a halt. "This is beautiful," Genevieve said, genuine pleasure momentarily displacing her unease. "I had no idea such tranquility could be found in London." "The city has its hidden sanctuaries," Mr. Thornton replied. "One simply has to know where to look." For the next hour, they sat in companionable conversation, Charlotte occasionally contributing, but more often watching with undisguised approval as Genevieve and Mr. Thornton discovered shared interests in literature, music, and surprisingly, politics. "You support the Reform Bill?" Genevieve asked, intrigued by his progressive views. "Wholeheartedly," he confirmed. "The expansion of the franchise is long overdue. Men who contribute to society through their labor and taxes deserve a voice in how they're governed." "My father would disagree vehemently," Genevieve said with a small smile. He considered the 1832 reforms dangerously radical. "And you, do you share your father's conservatism?" Genevieve considered the question seriously. "I believe in progress, but also in stability. The challenge lies in finding the balance between necessary change and reckless upheaval." Mr. Thornton's eyes lit with interest. "A nuanced perspective, Miss Caldwell. Most ladies I know either parrot their father's politics without thought or profess no interest in such masculine concerns." "I've always found that distinction arbitrary," Genevieve replied. "Laws and policies affect women's lives as surely as men's, even if we cannot vote on them directly." "Precisely my thought." His smile was warm with approval. "My mother has always said that denying women education in politics and commerce is like expecting them to navigate a ship without a compass or chart." "Your mother sounds remarkable," Genevieve said, genuinely interested. "Is she involved in your family's business?" "Very much so. My father values her judgment enormously. They are true partners in every sense." His expression grew thoughtful. "Their marriage has always been my model of what such a union should be. One of mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine affection." The words struck a chord deep within Genevieve. It was precisely the kind of marriage she had always secretly dreamed of, despite her mother's insistence that such romantic notions were impractical. "You're fortunate to have such an example," she said softly. "My parents' marriage was considerably more conventional." "Meaning?" Mr. Thornton prompted gently. "Meaning it was arranged for advantage, maintained out of duty, and sustained without particular passion or common purpose." Genevieve sighed. "When my father's fortunes collapsed, so did their union. My mother retreated to her sister in Bath rather than follow him to America. 25 years of marriage, and they parted with scarcely a backward glance." Mr. Thornton's expression sobered. "I'm sorry, Genevieve, that must have been painful to witness." The use of her given name, without the formal Miss Caldwell, seemed to slip out naturally, and neither acknowledged it directly. But something shifted between them in that moment, a small but significant breach in the formal barriers of propriety. "It confirmed what I've always suspected," Genevieve continued, emboldened by his evident sympathy. "That marriage without genuine affection is merely a business arrangement dressed in the trappings of respectability. I want more than that." She paused, suddenly aware of how forward she sounded. "Forgive me. That was unnecessarily personal." "Not at all." His voice was gentle but intense. "I find your honesty refreshing, and I share your view. Marriage should be a true partnership, founded on mutual respect and affection. Anything less is a pale imitation." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Genevieve felt something unspoken pass between them, an acknowledgement of shared values, of complementary spirits. Charlotte cleared her throat pointedly, reminding them of her presence. "The hour grows late," she observed. "We should return before the light begins to fade." The drive back to the Harringtons' townhouse was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. Genevieve was conscious of a growing warmth in her chest whenever she glanced at Mr. Thornton's profile. The strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the occasional smile that transformed his serious features. It was dangerous, this feeling. Hope was a luxury she could ill afford in her precarious position, and yet she couldn't quite suppress it, as Mr. Thornton handed her down from the curricle at the Harringtons' door. He retained her hand a moment longer than necessary. "I look forward to dinner tomorrow evening, Miss Caldwell." "As do I, Mr. Thornton," she replied softly. His eyes held hers. "Perhaps afterward you might play something on the pianoforte. Mrs. Harrington mentioned your skill." "Charlotte exaggerates my modest abilities," Genevieve demurred, though pleased by his request. "I doubt that very much." His smile was warm. "Until tomorrow, then." As the curricle pulled away, Charlotte linked her arm through Genevieve's and drew her inside. "Well, if there was any doubt about his interest before, there certainly isn't now. The way he looked at you, Genevieve." "You're reading too much into a pleasant afternoon," Genevieve protested, though her heart wasn't in the denial. "Am I?" "He called you by your given name, you know. I pretended not to notice, but I most certainly did." Genevieve felt her cheeks warm at the memory. It was a slip of the tongue, nothing more. Charlotte's knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise. "In any case, we must make you look especially beautiful for tomorrow's dinner. I have a pale green silk that would be perfect with your coloring." As they climbed the stairs to the bedchambers, Genevieve tried to temper her growing excitement with practical caution. One afternoon in Mr. Thornton's company, however pleasant, was hardly the foundation for serious expectations. He was being kind, perhaps even flirtatious, but men of his position did not form serious attachments to women in her circumstances. The sooner she accepted that reality, the less painful the inevitable disappointment would be. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, Genevieve found herself unable to extinguish the small flame of hope that had kindled in her chest. For the first time since her father's letter had shattered her world, she allowed herself to imagine a future that held more than mere survival, one that included genuine connection, mutual respect, perhaps even love. It was a dangerous dream, but in the privacy of her borrowed room, she permitted herself to dream it, if only for one night. The Harringtons' dinner party the following evening was an intimate affair by London standards, just 12 guests gathered around the elegantly appointed dining table. Edward had invited several business associates and their wives, while Charlotte had included a few of her closest friends from the ton. The result was an eclectic mix of the commercial and aristocratic worlds, with conversation ranging from the latest political debates to fashion to shipping routes. Genevieve, seated between a portly banker named Sir William Frost and a younger gentleman introduced as Mr. Henry Devlin, found herself unusually nervous. Mr. Thornton sat directly across from her, his presence both reassuring and distracting. Every time she glanced up, his eyes seemed to find hers, a small smile playing about his lips. Charlotte had indeed dressed her in the pale green silk, altered hastily by the household seamstress to fit Genevieve's slighter frame. With her hair arranged in an elegant style and borrowed pearl earrings at her lobes, she looked every inch the well-bred young lady she had been raised to be. Only she knew the precariousness of the facade. "Miss Caldwell, I understand you're newly arrived from Derbyshire," Sir William said, helping himself to another serving of roast beef. "How do you find London compared to country life?" "Very different, Sir William," Genevieve replied carefully. "The pace is considerably more brisk, and one is never at a loss for diversion." "Derbyshire, you say, Mr. Devlin interjected, his expression suddenly interested. "Would your family be the Caldwells of Thornfield Manor, by any chance?" Genevieve tensed, feeling the weight of several gazes upon her. "Yes, that was my family home." "Was," Mr. Devlin pressed, though his tone remained conversational. "I had heard it was recently sold." "Some unfortunate speculation, I believe." An uncomfortable silence descended on that portion of the table. Genevieve felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, my father encountered some financial reversals. These things happen in uncertain times." "Indeed they do," Mr. Thornton said from across the table, his voice carrying just enough authority to discourage further inquiry. "Sir William, I understand you've been considering an expansion of your banking interests to Liverpool. I'd be interested in your thoughts on the matter." The conversation shifted, and Genevieve shot Mr. Thornton a grateful glance. He nodded almost imperceptibly, his eyes conveying understanding and support. As the evening progressed through multiple courses and conversations, Genevieve observed Mr. Thornton with growing admiration. He spoke intelligently on a range of topics, listened attentively to others' views, and displayed a quiet confidence that drew respect without demanding it. When he did disagree with someone, he did so with such diplomatic skill that the other party rarely took offense. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, while the gentlemen remained for port and cigars. Lady Frost, a plump, good-natured woman with a penchant for gossip, immediately seized Genevieve's arm. "My dear Miss Caldwell, you must tell us how you know Mr. Thornton. I've never seen him so attentive to any young lady. The way he kept looking at you throughout dinner was most marked." Genevieve felt the other ladies' curious gazes upon her. "We were introduced at the Duchess of Westmoreland's ball," she said simply. "Mr. Thornton has been kind enough to call upon my cousin and me since then." "Kind?" Lady Frost laughed merrily. "My dear, Yardley Thornton is many things, but kind, in the sense you imply, is not one of them. He doesn't pay attention to young ladies out of mere kindness. Half the eligible daughters in London have set their caps for him, and he's remained steadfastly elusive." "What Lady Frost means," Charlotte interjected smoothly, "is that Mr. Thornton is known to be selective in his social engagements. The fact that he's shown interest in you is a compliment to your character and accomplishments, Genevieve." "Precisely," Lady Frost nodded vigorously. "Though I must say, there will be some disappointed mamas when word gets out. The Thornton fortune is substantial, you know. Some say it rivals that of the Duke of Westminster himself." Genevieve felt increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation continued in this vein, with speculation about Mr. Thornton's intentions and the advantages of such a match. It reminded her too much of her mother's calculating discussions of potential husbands, reducing complex human connections to a ledger of assets and liabilities. She was relieved when the gentleman joined them a short time later. Mr. Thornton made his way directly to her side, his expression brightening visibly. "Miss Caldwell," he said warmly, "Mrs. Harrington mentioned that you might favour us with some music this evening. I've been looking forward to it." "Oh yes, Genevieve, do play for us," Charlotte urged. "Mr. Thornton tells me you discussed a mutual appreciation for Beethoven during your drive yesterday." Genevieve hesitated. "I fear my skills may have been exaggerated, but if you insist." "We do," several voices chorused. As she moved to the pianoforte in the corner of the drawing room, Genevieve felt a familiar calm settle over her. Music had always been her refuge, the one arena where she felt completely confident in her abilities. Her father had spared no expense on masters for her education, and the hours she had spent practicing had given her a proficiency that went beyond mere accomplishment. She seated herself at the instrument, and after a moment's thought, began the opening measures of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The haunting, meditative first movement filled the room, and conversation gradually ceased as the guests were drawn into the music's spell. Genevieve lost herself in the piece, the familiar notes flowing from her fingers as naturally as breathing. For those minutes, she forgot her precarious circumstances, the uncertain future, the watchful eyes of London society. There was only the music, its beauty and complexity, a momentary escape from life's harsh realities. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence before enthusiastic applause broke out. Genevieve looked up, slightly dazed, to find Mr. Thornton standing near the pianoforte, his expression one of genuine admiration. "That was exquisite, Miss Caldwell," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "You play with both technical skill and true feeling, a rare combination." "Thank you," she replied, touched by his understanding. "Music has always been important to me." "I can see that." His eyes held hers. "Would you play something else, perhaps something livelier?" Genevieve smiled and turned back to the keys, launching into a spirited Mozart piece that showcased her dexterity. The room's atmosphere lightened, and several guests began tapping their feet in time with the music. She played 2 more selections before pleading fatigue, though in truth, she could have continued for hours. The evening was winding down, guests beginning to depart with warm thanks to their hosts. Mr. Thornton, she noticed, showed no sign of leaving. When only the Frosts remained, engaged in conversation with Edward near the door. Mr. Thornton approached Genevieve, where she sat on a small settee near the fireplace. "I wondered if I might have a word in private, Miss Caldwell," he said, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "With your cousin's permission, of course." Charlotte, overhearing, nodded encouragingly. "Of course. You may use the small library if you wish. The door remains open, naturally." Genevieve's heart began to beat faster as she followed Mr. Thornton to the adjacent room. The library was cozy, lined with leather-bound volumes and furnished with comfortable chairs. A small fire burned in the grate, casting a warm glow over the space. "Please sit," Mr. Thornton said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. Genevieve obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. What could he wish to discuss that required such privacy? Mr. Thornton remained standing, his tall figure silhouetted against the bookshelves. "Miss Caldwell, Genevieve, if I may, I find myself in an unusual position." "Oh," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He paced a few steps, then turned to face her directly. "We have known each other only a short time, yet I feel a connection with you that I have never experienced before. Your intelligence, your courage, your principles, all have impressed me deeply." Genevieve's breath caught. Was this leading where she hoped it might? "I'm honored by your good opinion," she said carefully. "It is more than good opinion." He moved closer, his expression intense. "I believe we could build something remarkable together. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection." "Mr. Thornton." "Yardley, please, at least when we're private." "Yardley," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. "I'm not sure I understand what you're proposing." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm proposing that we explore this connection between us, properly, with intention. I would court you, Genevieve, with the hope that it might lead to a more permanent union." Genevieve stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You wish to court me, despite my family's disgrace, despite my lack of fortune or connections?" Those circumstances don't define who you are, he said firmly. I care nothing for your father's financial mistakes or society's narrow judgments. I care about you, your mind, your spirit, your heart. The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to her eyes. This is unexpected. Is it? His smile was gentle. I thought I had made my interest quite clear. You have been kind, certainly, but not kind, interested, captivated, increasingly certain that you are a woman I could admire, respect, and yes, love for a lifetime. His hands tightened around hers. I realize this is sudden. I don't expect an immediate answer. I only ask that you consider allowing me to court you properly. Genevieve took a deep breath, trying to organize her tumultuous thoughts. Your family, would they approve? I have nothing to bring to such a union, except myself. And that is everything, he said simply. As for my family, they trust my judgment. My parents married for love against considerable opposition. They would understand better than most. And society, Lord Thistlewick has already begun to turn people against me. Let him try. My world is not governed by the petty dictates of men like Thistlewick. Yardley's expression hardened momentarily. Besides, for every door he attempts to close, I can open 2 more. The commercial world increasingly drives London society, Genevieve. Old titles without fortune carry less weight than they once did. She studied his face, searching for any hint of doubt or reservation. She found none, only a steady certainty that both frightened and exhilarated her. This is madness, she whispered, even as hope bloomed in her chest. We barely know each other. Then let us change that. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Give me the chance to know you better and to let you know me. That's all I ask for now. The warmth of his lips on her skin sent a tremor through Genevieve's entire body. This was happening too quickly, defying all the cautious restraint she had cultivated throughout her life. And yet, it felt right in a way she couldn't explain, as though some part of her had been waiting for this man, this moment. Yes, she said softly, the word escaping before she could reconsider. Yes, I would like that very much. Yardley's face transformed with a smile so genuine, so unguarded, that Genevieve felt her heart turn over in her chest. This was no calculated social maneuver, no cold assessment of advantage. This was a man genuinely pleased, perhaps even overjoyed, by her acceptance. You have made me very happy, Genevieve, he said, rising to his feet. I promise you won't regret this decision. I hope not, she replied, attempting lightness though her voice trembled slightly. For I've had quite enough regret to last a lifetime already. He offered his hand to help her rise, and as she stood, they found themselves standing close, too close for propriety, but neither moved away immediately. For a moment, Genevieve thought he might kiss her, and a part of her wished desperately that he would. Instead, he stepped back, respecting the boundaries of their still formal relationship. We should return to the others before your cousin sends out a search party. Genevieve nodded, both relieved and disappointed. Yes, of course. As they walked back to the drawing room, Yardley's hand rested lightly at the small of her back, a gesture both protective and possessive. Genevieve was acutely conscious of that point of contact, of the warmth that seemed to radiate from his touch through her entire body. Charlotte's eyes widened when they returned, her gaze darting between them with undisguised curiosity. The Frosts had departed, leaving only the Harringtons in the drawing room. I should take my leave, Yardley said, bowing to Charlotte and Edward. Thank you for a delightful evening. Will we see you tomorrow, Mr. Thornton? Charlotte asked, barely containing her excitement. I hope to call in the afternoon, if that would be convenient. His eyes sought Genevieve's. Perhaps Miss Caldwell might accompany me to the Royal Academy exhibition, with proper chaperonage, of course. I would be delighted, Genevieve replied, her cheeks warm under his gaze. After he had departed, Charlotte practically pounced on her. Well, what did he say? You were gone for nearly 20 minutes. Charlotte, Edward admonished gently, give the poor girl a moment to breathe. But Genevieve found she wanted to share her happiness, improbable as it seemed. Mr. Thornton has asked permission to court me, she said, still hardly believing the words as she spoke them. Charlotte let out a small shriek of delight. I knew it. The way he looked at you while you were playing, it was so obvious. Oh, Genevieve, this is wonderful. The most eligible bachelor in London, and he's chosen you. It's just a courtship, Charlotte, Genevieve cautioned, though her heart was singing. Nothing is certain yet. Nonsense. Yardley Thornton doesn't do anything by halves. If he's decided to court you, he's already determined on the outcome. Charlotte clasped her hands together. Just think, when you arrived a week ago, you were facing either America or a position as a governess. Now you may well become Mrs. Yardley Thornton, mistress of one of the greatest fortunes in England. Charlotte, Edward interjected, his tone gentle but firm. I'm sure Genevieve's feelings for Mr. Thornton go beyond his financial situation. Of course they do, Charlotte amended quickly. He's handsome, intelligent, and clearly besotted with her. The fortune is merely a happy coincidence. Genevieve smiled at her cousin's enthusiasm, but felt a shadow of unease. She didn't want to think of Yardley in terms of the security or status he could provide. That was precisely the kind of cold calculation she had rejected in Lord Thistlewick's offer. I admire him for who he is, not what he possesses, she said quietly. His kindness, his intelligence, his principles, that would be true whether he had a fortune or not. Edward nodded approvingly. Well said, Genevieve. And I believe Mr. Thornton feels the same about you. He's not a man swayed by superficial considerations. As the conversation continued, plans already being made for outings and engagements where Yardley could properly escort her, Genevieve felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation. Everything was moving so quickly, from the catastrophic loss of her family home to this unexpected possibility of a new beginning. Part of her feared it was too good to be true, that some disaster would yet arise to snatch this happiness from her grasp. But another part, a stronger part, chose to embrace the moment, to accept the gift of Yardley's regard without questioning whether she deserved it. That night, as she prepared for bed, Genevieve found herself humming the Beethoven sonata she had played earlier. For the first time since receiving her father's devastating letter, the future held more promise than peril. Whatever came next, whether her courtship with Yardley blossomed into something permanent or proved to be a brief, sweet interlude, she would face it with courage and hope. It was, she decided as she drifted towards sleep, a far better position than she had occupied just 1 week earlier. And for tonight, at least, that was enough. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Yardley's courtship proceeded with a determined intentionality that both thrilled and occasionally overwhelmed Genevieve. True to his word, he called at the Harringtons the very next day, escorting her and Charlotte to the Royal Academy exhibition, where his knowledge of art and architecture impressed even the most dedicated connoisseurs. That outing set the pattern for many more: visits to museums and galleries, afternoon drives in the park, evening concerts and theatre performances. Always properly chaperoned, always conducted with impeccable propriety, yet with an underlying current of growing intimacy that neither could deny. Yardley introduced Genevieve to his circle of friends and business associates, men and women who received her with genuine warmth despite the whispers that still followed her in certain quarters. Lord Thistlewick had indeed made good on his threats to damage her standing among the more conservative members of the ton, but Yardley's open attention effectively neutralized much of the scandal. You see, Charlotte said triumphantly after Lady Harwick, a noted society hostess, had personally invited Genevieve to her upcoming ball. I told you Mr. Thornton's interest would change everything. The doors that matter are opening for you. Genevieve couldn't deny the truth of her cousin's assessment. Yardley's courtship had transformed her social standing from precarious to almost enviable in the space of a few weeks. Yet she was determined not to lose sight of what truly mattered, the growing connection between them that had nothing to do with society's approval or disapproval. Their conversations ranged widely, from literature and politics to more personal matters, childhood memories, hopes for the future, values that guided their lives. With each exchange, each shared confidence, Genevieve found herself drawn deeper into Yardley's world, and he into hers. He spoke of his father's humble beginnings as a dock worker who had saved enough to purchase a single ship, building the Thornton fleet vessel by vessel through shrewd investment and relentless work. Of his mother, the daughter of a country physician, who had defied her family to marry a man they considered beneath her station. Of his own education at Cambridge, where he had excelled in mathematics and economics, but found his true passion in literature and philosophy. In turn, Genevieve shared stories of her childhood at Thornfield, the gardens where she had played, the library where she had discovered her love of books, the pianoforte where she had spent countless hours perfecting her skill. She spoke of her father's rigid traditionalism, her mother's cool pragmatism, and her own quiet rebellion against their limited vision of a woman's purpose. "I always knew I wanted more than they planned for me," she confided one afternoon as they walked through Kew Gardens, Charlotte following at a discreet distance. Not necessarily more in terms of status or wealth, but more substance. A life with meaning beyond social obligations and household management. "And what would that meaning be for you?" Yardley asked, his interest evident in his intent gaze. Genevieve considered the question seriously. "I believe it lies in genuine connection with ideas, with art, with people, in making a difference, however small, to those around me. In building something meaningful with someone who shares my values and vision." "Not unlike building a shipping empire," Yardley observed with a smile, "just in a different sphere." "I suppose so," she agreed. "Though I've never thought of it in those terms." "Perhaps you should. Your ambitions may not be commercial, but they require the same qualities: vision, determination, courage." His hand brushed hers as they walked, a fleeting touch that sent warmth coursing through her. "They're qualities I admire greatly." Such moments of connection, of mutual understanding, became increasingly frequent as their courtship progressed. Yet Genevieve was conscious that one significant barrier remained between them. She had not yet been introduced to Yardley's family. The Thorntons were currently at their country estate in Sussex, where Yardley's father was recuperating from a bout of influenza. Though Yardley spoke often and warmly of his parents, particularly of his mother's intelligence and his father's integrity, their absence from London meant that an important piece of approval was still missing from their courtship. Genevieve tried not to dwell on this concern, reminding herself that their relationship was still new, still developing. Yet as April turned to May and London's social season reached its height, she couldn't help but wonder whether Yardley's delay in presenting her to his family indicated some reservation on his part. Charlotte, ever attuned to her cousin's moods, noticed her preoccupation one evening as they prepared for the Harwick ball. "You're unusually quiet tonight, Genevieve. Is something troubling you?" Genevieve hesitated, then decided to voice her concern. "It's probably nothing, but Yardley has never suggested introducing me to his parents. They've been in Sussex for weeks now, and though he visits them regularly, he's never mentioned taking me with him." Charlotte frowned thoughtfully as she adjusted the lace on Genevieve's gown, a new creation of pale ivory silk, the first dress that had been made specifically for her since coming to London. The expense had been justified, Charlotte insisted, by the significance of Lady Harwick's ball and the certainty that Yardley would be there. "Have you asked him about it?" Charlotte inquired, ever practical. "No." "It seems presumptuous, somehow." "Nonsense, you've been courting for nearly a month. It's perfectly reasonable to wonder when you'll meet his family." Charlotte stepped back to assess her handiwork. "Ask him tonight. The worst he can say is that it's too soon." Genevieve nodded, though the prospect of raising the subject made her stomach flutter with nerves. What if his reluctance indicated doubts about their future? What if his parents, despite his reassurances, objected to their son forming an attachment to a woman without fortune or connections? The Harwick ball was everything London society expected: lavish decorations, excellent music, the finest refreshments, and most importantly, the right guests. Yardley was waiting for them when they arrived, his tall figure easy to spot among the crowd in the entrance hall. He moved to greet them immediately, his eyes lighting with pleasure as he took in Genevieve's appearance. "You look exquisite," he said simply, bowing over her hand. "Thank you," she replied, a blush rising to her cheeks at the admiration in his gaze. "The gown is Charlotte's doing." She insisted the occasion warranted something special. "Your cousin has excellent judgment." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" As they entered the ballroom, Genevieve was conscious of the many eyes upon them. She had grown somewhat accustomed to the attention their courtship attracted, but tonight it seemed especially pointed. Whispers followed in their wake, speculative glances exchanged between society matrons. "Is it my imagination," she murmured to Yardley, "or are we attracting more notice than usual?" He smiled slightly. "Not your imagination. There was a rather specific item in the Morning Post today about a certain shipping heir and his marked attention to a young lady recently arrived from Derbyshire." Genevieve's eyes widened. "Oh dear, Charlotte didn't mention it." "Probably to spare you unnecessary anxiety. It's nothing to concern yourself with, just the usual society gossip." His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Ignore them. They'll find some new subject to whisper about by next week." The orchestra struck up a waltz, and Yardley's eyebrows rose in question. "Shall we give them something substantive to discuss?" Despite her momentary discomfort, Genevieve found herself smiling. Why not? In for a penny, in for a pound, as they say. As he led her onto the floor and took her in his arms, the familiar magic of their connection asserted itself. The room seemed to fade around them as they moved in perfect synchronization, the music guiding their steps, their bodies attuned to each other in a way that transcended mere physical proximity. "Do you remember our first waltz?" Yardley asked softly, "at the Duchess's ball?" "Of course, you rescued me from Lord Thistlewick's unwelcome attention." "That was my pretext," he admitted, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "The truth is, I had noticed you the moment you entered the ballroom. You stood apart from the other young ladies, something in your bearing, your expression. I was looking for an excuse to approach you all evening." Genevieve felt her heart quicken at his confession. "I had no idea." "No, you wouldn't have. You were too busy trying to maintain your composure in the face of considerable stress." His smile was warm with admiration. "Your courage that night impressed me deeply. Most women in your position would have been overwhelmed." "I nearly was," she confessed, "until you appeared." Their eyes held, and Genevieve felt the now familiar surge of emotion that his presence increasingly evoked in her. A mixture of security, excitement, and something deeper, more profound, that she wasn't yet ready to name. As the waltz ended, and Yardley escorted her from the floor, they were immediately approached by a striking older woman with silver-streaked dark hair and remarkable amber eyes that matched Yardley's own. "Mother," Yardley exclaimed, genuine surprise in his voice, "I had no idea you were in London." "Clearly," the woman replied, her tone dry but her expression warm. "Your father's health has improved enough that I felt safe leaving him to the care of his nurses for a few days. I arrived this afternoon." Her gaze shifted to Genevieve, keen and assessing. "And this, I presume, is Miss Caldwell." Genevieve felt herself flush under the direct scrutiny. So this was Mrs. Thornton, the remarkable woman Yardley had spoken of with such admiration. Her appearance in London, and at this particular ball, could hardly be coincidental. "Yes," Yardley confirmed, his hand moving to the small of Genevieve's back in a subtly protective gesture. "Mother, may I present Miss Genevieve Caldwell?" "Genevieve, this is my mother, Mrs. Elena Thornton." Genevieve curtsied gracefully, years of training coming to her aid despite her inner turmoil. "I'm honored to meet you, Mrs. Thornton. Your son has spoken of you often, and with great affection." "Has he?" Mrs. Thornton's eyebrows rose slightly. "How gratifying. He's been considerably less forthcoming about you in his letters home. Though after witnessing that waltz, I begin to understand why. Some things are difficult to express in words." Yardley cleared his throat, a rare sign of discomfort. "Mother, perhaps we might find somewhere more private to continue this conversation. The middle of Lady Harwick's ballroom is hardly the place for introductions of such importance." "Of course, dear." Mrs. Thornton's smile held a hint of mischief. "Lady Harwick has thoughtfully provided several small sitting rooms for just such purposes. Shall we?" As they followed Mrs. Thornton through the crowd, Genevieve felt a curious mixture of anxiety and relief. She had wondered about Yardley's delay in introducing her to his family. Now it appeared the introduction was being forced upon him. What that meant for their courtship, she could only guess. The sitting room Mrs. Thornton led them to was a small but elegant space, furnished with comfortable chairs and a small sofa. A fire burned in the grate despite the mild May evening, lending the room a cozy intimacy. "Much better," Mrs. Thornton declared, seating herself in one of the chairs and gesturing for Genevieve to take the sofa. "Now we can speak freely." Yardley remained standing, his posture suggesting a tension Genevieve had rarely seen in him. "Mother, I had planned to bring Genevieve to Sussex next week to meet you and father properly. This surprise appearance is somewhat irregular." "Irregular?" Mrs. Thornton laughed softly. "My dear boy, when the Morning Post begins speculating about your matrimonial intentions, a mother is entitled to some irregularity." She turned to Genevieve. "You must forgive my intrusion, Miss Caldwell. I'm not typically given to such dramatic gestures, but Yardley's letters have been frustratingly vague, and I'm not as young as I once was. I decided I couldn't wait for formal introductions." Genevieve found herself warming to the older woman's directness. "There's nothing to forgive, Mrs. Thornton. I've been eager to meet you as well." "Have you, Mrs.?" Thornton studied her with those penetrating eyes, so like her son's. "Then we are well matched in curiosity, at least. Yardley tells me you're from Derbyshire originally." "Thornfield Manor, I believe." "Yes, though my family no longer resides there." Genevieve kept her voice steady, determined to face any questions about her background without flinching. "My father experienced some financial reversals, and the estate was sold." "Railway investments, I understand." "Mother," Yardley interjected, a warning in his tone. "It's all right, Yardley," Genevieve said quietly. She turned back to Mrs. Thornton. "Yes, my father invested heavily in railway ventures that failed. He has gone to America to rebuild his fortune, while I came to London to stay with my cousin, Mrs. Harrington." "Mrs." Thornton nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for your honesty, Miss Caldwell. It's a quality I value highly." She glanced at her son, "As does Yardley, I believe." "It is one of Genevieve's many admirable qualities," Yardley agreed, moving to sit beside Genevieve on the sofa, a gesture of solidarity that did not go unnoticed by his mother. "I see," Mrs. Thornton's expression softened slightly. "Well, Miss Caldwell, since we're being direct with one another, I should tell you that I came to London with some concerns about this attachment. The reports in the society papers suggested a young lady of reduced circumstances, possibly seeking an advantageous match with my son." Genevieve felt her cheeks burn. "I assure you, Mrs. Thornton, that was never my intention. Indeed, when Yardley first expressed interest in courting me, I was considering employment as a governess. I had no expectation or design of securing a wealthy husband." So Yardley mentioned in his most recent letter, the one that finally provided some actual details about you, Mrs. Thornton said with a pointed look at her son. "He also mentioned your remarkable musical ability, your intelligence, and your principled rejection of Lord Thistlewick's offer despite your precarious circumstances." Yardley reached for Genevieve's hand, entwining his fingers with hers in a gesture too intimate for strict propriety, but one that conveyed his support unmistakably. "I've told you, Mother, that Genevieve is unlike any woman I've ever met. Her courage, her integrity, her refusal to be defined by circumstance, these are the qualities that drew me to her, not some superficial social credential." "Mrs." Thornton observed their clasped hands with a raised eyebrow, but made no comment on the breach of etiquette. "And what of your feelings, Miss Caldwell? My son can be quite persuasive when he sets his mind to something, as I know better than most. Has his persistence won your affection as well as your attention?" The directness of the question momentarily took Genevieve aback. In the formal dance of courtship, such explicit discussions of feelings were generally considered improper, at least until a formal engagement was announced. Yet Mrs. Thornton's gaze held no judgment, only a mother's sincere concern for her son's happiness, and Yardley's hand in hers gave her courage to answer with equal honesty. "Your son has indeed won my affection, Mrs. Thornton," she said softly, "not through persistence alone, but through the quality of his character, the depth of his mind, and the kindness of his heart. My regard for him has nothing to do with his position or fortune, and everything to do with who he is as a man." Something in Mrs. Thornton's expression shifted, a subtle softening, a warming of her gaze. "Well said, Miss Caldwell, and I believe you, which simplifies matters considerably." Yardley's posture relaxed visibly. "Does this mean you approve, Mother?" "It means I'm no longer concerned that Miss Caldwell is a fortune hunter," Mrs. Thornton replied dryly. "As for full approval, I reserve that until she's met your father and we've had more opportunity to become acquainted." She turned back to Genevieve. "But I will say that you've made a favorable first impression, Miss Caldwell. More favorable than I anticipated, I confess." "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton," Genevieve said, genuinely touched by the admission. "I look forward to becoming better acquainted as well." "Excellent." Mrs. Thornton rose from her chair. "Now, I believe we should return to the ballroom before our absence causes even more speculation. Yardley, you might consider dancing with someone other than Miss Caldwell for the remainder of the evening. Variety in one's dance partners is still considered a virtue in polite society, however inconvenient you may find it." Yardley laughed, the last of his tension dissolving. "Yes, Mother, your guidance in matters of propriety is, as always, impeccable." As they made their way back to the ballroom, Genevieve felt a curious lightness in her chest. Mrs. Thornton's unexpected appearance had initially alarmed her, but the meeting had gone better than she could have hoped. The older woman's direct manner and sharp intelligence reminded her strongly of Yardley himself, and her evident love for her son was both touching and reassuring. "Your mother is formidable," Genevieve murmured as they approached the ballroom doors. "But I like her very much." "She likes you too," Yardley replied confidently, though she'd never admit it so quickly. "That comment about a favorable first impression is high praise indeed from my mother." "I'm glad." Genevieve hesitated, then added, "I was beginning to worry that your delay in introducing me to your family might indicate some reservation about our courtship." Yardley stopped, turning to face her fully. "Never that," he said firmly. "My only reservation was about subjecting you to my mother's intense scrutiny before our own connection was firmly established. I wanted you to be secure in my regard before facing the Thornton Inquisition." His choice of words, "secure in my regard," sent a warm flutter through Genevieve's chest. "And now, do you believe our connection is firmly established?" His eyes held hers, their amber depth serious despite his smile. "I do, don't you?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications that went far beyond their current conversation. Genevieve thought of the past month, the conversations, the shared confidences, the growing sense of rightness she felt in Yardley's company. Whatever had begun between them that first night at the Duchess's ball had deepened into something she could no longer dismiss or deny. "Yes," she said softly, "I do." His smile deepened, and for a moment Genevieve thought he might kiss her right there in Lady Harwick's corridor, propriety be damned. Instead, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. "Then perhaps it's time we discussed what comes next," he said, his voice low and intimate, "but not tonight. Tonight, we dance and make your official introduction to my mother a social success." As they re-entered the ballroom, Genevieve caught sight of Mrs. Thornton, already engaged in conversation with Lady Harwick and several other prominent society matrons. The older woman glanced their way briefly, a small smile playing about her lips before she returned her attention to her companions. The message was clear, the path forward had just been subtly approved. Whatever came next in her courtship with Yardley, at least one potential obstacle had been removed. Genevieve squeezed Yardley's hand before releasing it, a silent acknowledgement of this significant development. Then, following Mrs. Thornton's advice, she accepted the next dance with a gentleman from Edward's business circle, leaving Yardley to fulfill his social obligations with other partners. As she moved through the patterns of the country dance, Genevieve found her thoughts racing ahead to what Yardley had meant by what comes next. Was he contemplating a formal proposal? After just a month of courtship, it seemed precipitous by conventional standards, yet nothing about their relationship had followed the usual trajectory. The ball continued late into the night, a whirl of dances and conversations that left Genevieve pleasantly exhausted but exhilarated. Mrs. Thornton departed earlier, citing the fatigue of travel, but not before extending a formal invitation for Genevieve to join them for dinner the following evening at the Thorntons' London residence. "My husband is eager to meet you," she told Genevieve. "He's still too weak for social gatherings of this scale, but a quiet dinner at home should be manageable." "I would be honored," Genevieve replied, genuinely pleased by the invitation. "Mrs. Thornton nodded approvingly. "Yardley will call for you at 7. Until tomorrow, Miss Caldwell." When Genevieve and Charlotte finally departed shortly after midnight, Yardley escorted them to their carriage, his hand warm at Genevieve's back. "Until tomorrow," he murmured as he helped her into the vehicle. "Sleep well, Genevieve." "And you, Yardley," she replied, her voice soft with emotions she couldn't fully express in such a public setting. As the carriage pulled away, Charlotte practically vibrated with excitement beside her. Well, meeting his mother unexpectedly, and now invited to dinner to meet his father. "This is progressing, even more quickly than I anticipated." "It's just dinner, Charlotte," Genevieve cautioned, though she couldn't suppress her own sense of anticipation. "Mrs. Thornton merely wants her husband to meet me, since he's unable to attend social functions." "Just dinner, Genevieve, don't be naive. This is the final inspection before formal approval." Charlotte squeezed her arm. "I wouldn't be surprised if Yardley proposes within the week." "Surely not," Genevieve protested, though her heart leapt at the possibility. "We've known each other barely a month." "That would be unusually hasty, even for a conventional courtship." "There's nothing conventional about your courtship," Charlotte pointed out. "Besides, Yardley Thornton isn't a man to hesitate once his mind is made up. And the way he looks at you, well, his mind is very clearly made up." Genevieve fell silent, unable to argue with her cousin's assessment, yet unwilling to build expectations that might lead to disappointment. Whatever Yardley's intentions, tomorrow's dinner with his parents represented a significant step in their relationship. She would approach it with cautious optimism, nothing more. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, Genevieve couldn't help but allow herself a moment of pure, uncomplicated hope. Despite all the upheavals of the past months, the loss of her home, her family's disgrace, her precarious social standing, something new and precious had taken root in her life. Something that held the promise of a future brighter than any she had imagined possible in the dark days after her father's devastating letter. Whether that promise would be fulfilled remained to be seen. But for tonight, at least, she would permit herself to dream of possibilities. The Thorntons' London residence proved to be a handsome house in Belgrave Square, substantial without being ostentatious, its elegant facade suggesting prosperity tempered by good taste. As Yardley escorted Genevieve up the steps the following evening, she felt a flutter of nerves despite his reassuring presence. "My father is looking forward to meeting you," he said, squeezing her hand. "Mother spoke highly of you after last night's ball." "Did she?" Genevieve asked, surprised. She seemed reserved in her judgment. Yardley chuckled. "That's my mother's way. Reserved in judgment is practically effusive praise from her. Trust me, she was impressed." The butler who admitted them directed them to a comfortably appointed drawing room where Mrs. Thornton waited with a grey-haired gentleman seated in a large armchair near the fire. Though clearly still recovering from his illness, his face was thin, and a certain fragility marked his movements. Mr. James Thornton possessed the same alert intelligence evident in his wife's and son's expressions. "Father," Yardley said warmly, crossing to shake the older man's hand, "you're looking stronger today." "I feel it," Mr. Thornton replied, his voice surprisingly robust despite his frail appearance. "Your mother's nursing and my own stubbornness are prevailing at last." His gaze shifted to Genevieve, curiosity evident in his expression. "And this must be Miss Caldwell." Genevieve stepped forward, curtsying gracefully. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thornton. Your son has spoken of you with great admiration." "Has he?" Mr. Thornton's eyes twinkled. "How diplomatic of him. I imagine he's also mentioned my occasional stubbornness and complete lack of patience for fools." Father, Yardley protested, but Genevieve laughed, already warming to the older man's directness. He may have alluded to certain, strongly held opinions, she acknowledged, but always in the context of principles that guide your business and personal affairs. Well put, Miss Caldwell, Mrs. Thornton nodded approvingly. Yardley mentioned your gift for diplomacy. I see he wasn't exaggerating. Not diplomacy, Mother, just an appreciation for nuance. Yardley guided Genevieve to a seat on the sofa, taking a place beside her. Genevieve understands that strength of conviction isn't the same as blind stubbornness. Unlike some of your previous acquaintances, Mrs. Thornton remarked dryly, Miss Bancroft comes to mind. A slight flush colored Yardley's cheeks. Miss Bancroft was a passing association, hardly worth mentioning. Mr. Thornton chuckled. What my wife means, Miss Caldwell, is that you appear to possess both intelligence and backbone, qualities we value in this family, and which have been notably absent in some of the young ladies who have set their caps for my son over the years. Father, please, Yardley sighed. Must we discuss my past associations on Genevieve's first visit to our home? Why not? Mr. Thornton replied reasonably. If your intentions are as serious as your letters suggest, Miss Caldwell should know what she's getting herself into. The Thornton men have a history of inspiring strong feelings in women, not all of them positive. Genevieve felt her cheeks warm at the frank discussion of Yardley's intentions, but she maintained her composure. I appreciate your candor, Mr. Thornton, and I assure you I'm not easily intimidated by complex histories. No, I don't imagine you are, Mrs. Thornton said with a small smile. Not after what you've faced in recent months. Yardley has told us something of your family situation, Miss Caldwell. I hope you don't mind. Not at all, Genevieve replied, though she wondered exactly how much Yardley had shared. My family's misfortunes are hardly a secret in London society, thanks to certain interested parties. You refer to Lord Thistlewick, I presume, Mr. Thornton said, his expression darkening slightly. A most disagreeable man. I've had dealings with him in the past, always to my regret. James was instrumental in blocking Thistlewick's attempt to secure a seat on the East India Company's board of directors some years ago, Mrs. Thornton explained. The enmity between them is long-standing, which may partially explain his excessive interest in discrediting you, Miss Caldwell, Mr. Thornton added. Once he learned of Yardley's attention to you, it became another avenue to strike at me indirectly. Genevieve frowned, distressed by the implication. I had no idea my situation might cause difficulties for your family, Mr. Thornton. Lord Thistlewick's antagonism toward me was personal, or so I believed. It likely began that way, Yardley agreed, but once he recognized the connection to our family, his motivations would have expanded. Thistlewick never misses an opportunity to pursue a grudge. Which makes your rejection of his offer all the more satisfying, Mrs. Thornton remarked with unexpected humor. I only wish I could have witnessed it personally. The conversation was interrupted by the butler's announcement that dinner was served. Mr. Thornton rose slowly from his chair, waving away Yardley's offered assistance with good-natured irritation. I'm not an invalid boy, just recovering. He offered his arm to Mrs. Thornton. Shall we, my dear? I find I have quite an appetite this evening. Dinner proved to be a pleasant affair, the food excellent without being ostentatious, the conversation flowing easily among the four of them. Genevieve found herself increasingly at ease in the Thorntons' company, their direct manner and evident affection for each other creating an atmosphere very different from the formal, often strained meals she remembered from her parents' table. Mr. and Mrs. Thornton asked thoughtful questions about her life at Thornfield, her education, her interests, showing genuine curiosity rather than conducting a calculated assessment of her suitability. When the topic turned to music and Genevieve mentioned her love for the pianoforte, Mrs. Thornton's eyes lit up. Yardley mentioned your talent, she said warmly. Perhaps after dinner you might favor us with a demonstration. The instrument in our music room is one of our few genuine extravagances, a Broadwood grand that James insisted on purchasing when we first moved to London. I would be delighted, Genevieve replied, pleased by the request. As the meal progressed, she observed the interactions between Yardley and his parents with growing interest. There was a comfortable familiarity between them, an easy give and take that spoke of mutual respect rather than rigid hierarchy. Mr. Thornton clearly valued his son's opinions on business matters, while Mrs. Thornton engaged him as an intellectual equal in discussions of politics and social issues. It was, Genevieve realized, precisely the kind of family dynamic she had always quietly longed for, one based on genuine affection and shared values rather than obligation and appearance. The contrast with her own parents' cool, formal relationship was stark and somewhat painful to acknowledge. After dinner, they retired to the music room, where a magnificent pianoforte stood in pride of place near the windows. Genevieve seated herself at the instrument, running her fingers lightly over the keys to test its action. "What would you like to hear?" she asked, glancing at her hosts. "Something that moves you," Mrs. Thornton suggested. "Music is most affecting when the performer feels a genuine connection to the piece." Genevieve nodded, considering for a moment before beginning Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The flowing, lyrical piece had always spoken to her deeply, its gentle melancholy giving way to moments of transcendent beauty. As she played, losing herself in the familiar notes, Genevieve was only peripherally aware of her audience, Mr. Thornton in his armchair, Mrs. Thornton on a small settee beside him, and Yardley standing near the pianoforte, his expression intent as he watched her fingers move across the keys. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of appreciative silence before Mr. Thornton spoke. "Extraordinary, Miss Caldwell. You play with both technical precision and genuine feeling, a rare combination." "Thank you," Genevieve replied, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "Would you play something else?" Mrs. Thornton requested. "Perhaps something more exuberant. I find myself in need of some liveliness after such beautiful melancholy." Genevieve smiled and launched into a spirited Mozart rondo, its bright, intricate patterns demanding all her concentration. As she played, she caught glimpses of Yardley's expression, a mixture of pride, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart quicken despite the technical demands of the piece. When she finished, the applause was enthusiastic, even from the normally reserved Mrs. Thornton. "Remarkable," she declared. "Yardley did not exaggerate your talent, Miss Caldwell. You could have performed professionally, had circumstances and society permitted it." "My mother harbored similar ambitions for me," Genevieve admitted, "though my father considered public performance inappropriate for a gentleman's daughter." "A common but unfortunate view," Mr. Thornton commented. "Talent should be celebrated, not constrained by arbitrary social boundaries. Which is why our son was permitted to pursue his interests in literature and philosophy despite their limited commercial application," Mrs. Thornton added with a fond glance at Yardley. "A decision I believe has served him well, even in business matters." "It certainly has," Yardley agreed. "Understanding human nature and the currents of thought that shape society is invaluable in commerce, despite what some of my more practically minded colleagues believe." The conversation continued in this vein for some time, touching on education, art, and the proper balance between practical skills and cultural refinement. Throughout, Genevieve was struck by the Thorntons' progressive views, especially regarding women's education and capabilities. "Elena was instrumental in establishing a school for the daughters of our workers," Mr. Thornton explained with evident pride. "She insisted that girls deserved the same opportunities for learning as boys, a radical notion when we first proposed it 15 years ago." "Less radical now, thankfully," Mrs. Thornton said, "though there is still considerable resistance to the idea of women being educated beyond basic accomplishments and household management." "A resistance I've never understood," Genevieve remarked. "A well-educated woman makes a better mother, a more interesting companion, and a more capable manager of her household. What reasonable objection could there be?" "The fear that she might develop opinions of her own," Yardley suggested dryly, "which many men find threatening to their sense of authority." "Insecure men, perhaps," Mr. Thornton countered, I've always found Elena's intelligence and independent thinking to be her most attractive qualities, though her beauty certainly didn't hurt matters. He winked at his wife, who rolled her eyes but smiled nonetheless. Flatterer, she murmured, though her expression was pleased. Watching them, Genevieve felt a pang of something like envy, not for their wealth or position, but for the evident warmth and mutual respect that still characterized their relationship after decades of marriage. It was a vision of partnership so different from her parents' cool accommodation that it seemed almost to belong to another world. As the evening drew to a close, Mr. Thornton began to show signs of fatigue, and Mrs. Thornton gently suggested it was time for him to retire. "I've overexerted myself," he admitted ruefully, "though it was well worth it for such pleasant company. Miss Caldwell, I hope we'll see you again very soon." "I hope so too, Mr. Thornton," Genevieve replied warmly. "Thank you for your hospitality." As Mr. Thornton made his way slowly upstairs with Mrs. Thornton's assistance, Yardley and Genevieve found themselves alone in the music room. A brief moment of privacy before propriety demanded her departure. "Your parents are wonderful," Genevieve said sincerely. "I see now why you speak of them with such admiration." "They've set a high standard," Yardley agreed, moving to stand beside her at the pianoforte. "Both in business and in personal matters. Their marriage has always been my model of what such a union should be." "They clearly adore each other still," Genevieve observed. "It's rather beautiful to witness." "Yes," Yardley's expression grew serious. "And rare, I think. Few couples maintain that level of genuine connection over decades together." "My parents certainly didn't," Genevieve said softly. "I used to wonder if there had ever been real affection between them, or if their marriage had always been the business arrangement it appeared to be in my lifetime." Yardley's hand covered hers where it rested on the pianoforte. "I'm sorry, Genevieve. Everyone deserves to witness love as they grow up, not just romantic love, but the kind of enduring partnership my parents have built." The warmth of his touch, the gentleness in his voice, stirred something deep within Genevieve's heart. "Yes," she whispered, "they do." For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Then Yardley's fingers tightened slightly around hers. "I've been thinking about what I said last night," he began, his voice low and intense, "about discussing what comes next in our relationship." Genevieve's heart began to race. "Yes." "I had planned something more formal, more traditional." His eyes held her steadily. "But being here, in this room where you've shared your music after watching you with my parents, I find I can't wait for carefully planned moments." He took both her hands in his, turning to face her fully. "Genevieve, in the short time we've known each other, you've become essential to my happiness. Your intelligence, your courage, your integrity, all have impressed me beyond words. But it's more than admiration I feel for you. It's love, deep, certain, and growing stronger each day." Genevieve felt her breath catch in her throat. Though she had begun to hope, to suspect his feelings might match her own, hearing him declare them so openly was overwhelming. "Yardley," she whispered, unable to say more. "I know this is sudden," he continued, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "Society would say we've known each other too briefly for such certainty, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Genevieve Caldwell, and if you could find it in your heart to consider a future with me, I would be the happiest of men." Tears pricked at Genevieve's eyes, not from sorrow, but from a joy so intense it was almost painful. "I love you too," she said simply. "I think I began to fall in love with you that first night, during our waltz. Everything since has only deepened that feeling." Yardley's face transformed with a smile of such genuine happiness that Genevieve felt her heart might burst. "Then, with your permission, I'd like to speak to your cousin Edward tomorrow, as your closest male relative here in London, and formally request your hand in marriage." "Yes," Genevieve said without hesitation. "Yes, I would like that very much." For a moment, they stood gazing at each other, their joined hands the only point of contact between them, but their eyes communicating volumes. Then, with a gentle tug, Yardley drew her closer, one hand releasing hers to cup her cheek. "May I?" he murmured, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips. In answer, Genevieve tilted her face up to his. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a careful exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound as Yardley's arms slipped around her waist, drawing her against him. The sound of a throat being cleared from the doorway broke them apart, both turning to find Mrs. Thornton regarding them with a raised eyebrow, but the hint of a smile on her lips. "I see matters have progressed in my absence," she remarked dryly. "Should I be offering congratulations?" Yardley kept his arm around Genevieve's waist, a silent declaration of intent. "Yes, mother. If Edward Harrington gives his consent tomorrow, Genevieve has agreed to become my wife." Mrs. Thornton's smile deepened. "Excellent, though perhaps the remainder of your celebration might wait until after a formal engagement is announced. Propriety does still matter in certain circles, even if you young people find it inconvenient." "Of course, mother." Yardley's tone was appropriately contrite, though his eyes danced with barely suppressed joy. "I'll escort Genevieve home immediately." "See that you do." Mrs. Thornton stepped forward to kiss Genevieve's cheek. "Welcome to our family, my dear, presuming all proceeds as expected tomorrow. I look forward to getting to know you better in the days to come." "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton," Genevieve replied, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions within. "I look forward to that as well." The carriage ride back to the Harringtons was a curious mixture of excitement and restraint. Seated side by side, Yardley and Genevieve maintained a proper distance, aware of the driver's presence and the dictates of propriety. Yet their hands found each other in the darkness, fingers intertwining in silent affirmation of what had passed between them. "I'll call upon Edward first thing tomorrow morning," Yardley said softly. "With his consent, we could announce our engagement at Lady Morrison's musical evening the day after tomorrow. Nearly everyone who matters will be there." "So soon?" Genevieve asked, though her heart leapt at the prospect. "Too soon," concern flickered in his eyes. "We could wait if you prefer. I don't want to rush you into anything." "No," she said quickly, "not too soon, just unexpected. A month ago I was facing either America or a position as a governess. And now?" "And now," he prompted when she fell silent. "And now I'm happier than I ever thought possible," she finished softly. "It seems almost too perfect to be true." Yardley squeezed her hand. "I assure you, it's very real, though I can't promise our life together will be without challenges. The shipping business can be volatile, and my family has its share of complexities, as you've begun to discover." "All families do," Genevieve replied, "and I would rather face challenges with you than security without you." His smile in the dim light of the carriage was tender. "Then we're agreed. Tomorrow I speak with Edward. The day after we announce our engagement to London society. And then," he lifted her hand to his lips, "then we begin planning our future together." As the carriage pulled up to the Harringtons' townhouse, Genevieve felt a curious sense of completion, as though she had been travelling toward this moment her entire life without knowing it. The path had been circuitous, marked by loss and uncertainty, but it had led her here, to this man who saw her not for her family connections or fortune, but for herself. Yardley helped her from the carriage and escorted her to the door, where they paused for a moment, reluctant to part despite the lateness of the hour. "Until tomorrow," he said softly, raising her hand to his lips once more. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, her heart full to bursting with joy and anticipation. As she watched his carriage pull away, Genevieve knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, she would face them with courage and hope. For in finding Yardley, she had found not just love, but a partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. The very thing she had always secretly longed for, even when she believed it impossible. One waltz had indeed changed everything. And now, a new dance was beginning, one that would last a lifetime. The following morning, Yardley arrived at the Harrington household promptly at 10 o'clock, dressed formally in a dark frock coat and carrying his hat and gloves. Jenkins, the butler, showed him directly to Edward's study, where Genevieve's cousin awaited him. Genevieve, watching from the drawing-room window, felt a curious mixture of anticipation and serenity. Though convention dictated she remain upstairs during this interview, Charlotte had insisted on a compromise. They would wait in the drawing room, close enough to be summoned quickly, but far enough removed to maintain the fiction of proper distance. "You're remarkably calm," Charlotte observed, watching Genevieve with amused affection. "I was a nervous wreck when Edward spoke to my father." "I'm not calm inside," Genevieve admitted, "but I trust Yardley and I trust Edward. There's no reason the interview should go poorly." Charlotte smiled knowingly. "And yet, most young ladies in your position would be pacing the floor. Your composure is quite extraordinary." Genevieve turned from the window, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps it's because I've already faced my worst fears. After losing Thornfield, after confronting the possibility of a life of dependent servitude, this feels like a miracle. One I can hardly believe is happening, but which I refuse to spoil with needless anxiety." "My dear cousin," Charlotte said with sudden feeling, "you have changed since coming to London. There's a strength in you now, a certainty that wasn't there before." "Not strength," Genevieve corrected gently, "just clarity about what matters, about what I truly want from life," she smiled. "And about who I wish to share it with." Before Charlotte could respond, the drawing-room door opened, and Edward appeared, his expression deliberately neutral though his eyes sparkled with suppressed excitement. "Genevieve," he said formally, "Mr. Thornton has requested a private word with you in the study. If you feel able to receive him, that is." Genevieve rose, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled slightly despite her earlier composure. "Yes, thank you, Edward. I would be happy to speak with Mr. Thornton." As she passed her cousin in the doorway, Edward squeezed her arm gently. "He's a good man, Genevieve," he murmured. "You've chosen well." "Or perhaps he has," she replied with a small smile. The short walk to Edward's study seemed to take both an eternity and no time at all. Genevieve paused at the door, drawing a deep breath to steady herself, then entered with her chin high and her heart racing. Yardley stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light. He turned as she entered, and the joy that transformed his features at the sight of her made Genevieve's breath catch. "Genevieve," he said softly, crossing the room to take her hands in his. "Your cousin has given his consent, though he was quite thorough in his questioning, I must say." "Edward takes his responsibilities seriously," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "He's been like a brother to me these past weeks. And a formidable guardian of your interests." Yardley's thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "But he's satisfied that my intentions are honorable and my means sufficient to provide for you properly." "As if those were ever in doubt," Genevieve murmured. "Nevertheless, it's proper that he asked, and proper that I answered." Yardley's expression grew serious. "Which brings me to the reason I've asked to speak with you privately." Still holding her hands, he dropped to one knee, his amber eyes shining with an emotion so raw, so open, that it stole the breath from her lungs. "Genevieve Caldwell," he said, his voice rough with feeling, "I cannot offer you a dukedom or an ancient title. I can only offer you a name built on trade and ambition. But with it, I offer you my heart, my respect, and a partnership that will value your mind as much as your beauty. I offer you a life where you will never be merely an ornament, but the very foundation of my home." He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring of stunning craftsmanship, a central sapphire surrounded by diamonds set in gold. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you build that life with me?" Genevieve looked down at the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had offered her respect when others offered only calculation. She thought of the long, lonely years her mother had endured in a marriage of convenience and the bright, warm future Yardley was holding out to her. "I don't need a title, Yardley," she whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I only need you." She sank down to her knees beside him, heedless of her skirts, bringing herself to his level. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Yardley let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. He kissed her then, a kiss of promise, of passion, and of profound relief. It was a seal on their future, a defiance of every convention that said a ruined gentleman's daughter had no right to such happiness. The announcement of their engagement at Lady Morrison's musical evening 2 days later caused exactly the sensation Charlotte had predicted. When Yardley entered the room with Genevieve on his arm, her hand resting possessively on his sleeve and the sapphire ring catching the candlelight, a hush fell over the assembled guests. Lord Thistlewick was there, standing near the refreshment table with a group of cronies. Genevieve saw his eyes narrow, his face mottling with colour as he took in the scene. For a moment, fear flickered in her belly, the old reflex of the vulnerable facing the powerful. Then she felt Yardley's arm tighten against hers, a solid wall of support. She looked up at him and saw him watching Thistlewick with a cool, challenging stare that dared the older man to speak a word against his future bride. Thistlewick held the gaze for a long moment, then looked away, turning his back to engage in conversation with his neighbour. It was a concession, a retreat. The Westmoreland influence was formidable, but the Thornton fortune and the sheer force of Yardley's will was a power all its own. "He won't bother you again," Yardley murmured in her ear. "I know," Genevieve replied, realizing with a jolt of joy that it was true. She was no longer prey. She was safe. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, some sincere, some calculated, all accepted with grace. Mrs. Thornton, true to her word, stood visibly by Genevieve's side for much of the night, her formidable presence silencing even the most vicious gossips. "She will do," Genevieve heard her murmur to Lady Harwick. "My son has chosen a woman of substance, a rare thing in this city." The wedding took place in late June at St. George's Church in Hanover Square. It was the society event of the season, attended by a mix of aristocracy and the titans of industry. Charlotte wept openly into her handkerchief, Edward beamed with avuncular pride, and Mr. and Mrs. Thornton looked on with deep satisfaction. But as Genevieve walked down the aisle toward Yardley, the crowded church faded away. She saw only him, the amber eyes that had promised her a partnership, the hands that had offered her a future. She thought of her father, rebuilding his life in America, and her mother, secure in Bath. She had written to them both, receiving her father's blessing and her mother's bewildered congratulations. They had found their own paths, just as she had found hers. "I, Genevieve, take thee, Yardley." Her voice rang clear and true in the silent church. She was not the frightened girl who had fled Thornfield Manor. She was a woman who had faced ruin and chosen love. She was a partner. She was a Thornton. And as Yardley kissed her, sealing their vows before God and society, Genevieve knew that the whispers would continue, speculating on her luck, her influence, her past. But they no longer mattered. Let them whisper. She had the only thing worth listening to, the steady beat of her husband's heart against her own. Epilogue. London, 1855. The nursery of the Thornton home in Belgrave Square was a chaotic, happy place. 3-year-old William was building a tower of blocks in the centre of the rug, while his infant sister, Elena, slept in the cradle by the window. Genevieve sat in the window seat, a letter from New York in her hand. Her father's business was finally thriving. He wrote of new railways, of a country that looked only forward, never back. He hoped to visit in the spring. Good news. Yardley stood in the doorway, home early from the shipping offices. He looked tired, but his eyes lit up as they landed on his wife. "Very good," she smiled, setting the letter aside. "Father is coming to see his grandchildren." Yardley crossed the room, stooping to ruffle William's hair before coming to sit beside her. "That is good news, though I suspect he'll find the house rather noisy." "He'll love it," Genevieve said confidently. She leaned against her husband, looking out at the London twilight. 10 years had passed since the day she had thought her life ended with the loss of Thornfield. 10 years of building a life that was richer, deeper, and more vibrant than anything she could have imagined in the safety of her ancestral home. She had found her substance. She had found her meaning. Yardley took her hand, his thumb tracing the gold band that sat beneath the sapphire engagement ring. "You're pensive tonight, Mrs. Thornton." "Just remembering," she said softly. Remembering a girl who thought love and security were mutually exclusive. "And what would you tell her now?" Genevieve looked up at him, her heart full. "I would tell her that sometimes, if you are very brave and very lucky, you find a man who gives you both." She raised his hand to her lips. "I would tell her to accept the waltz." Yardley smiled, the same warm, intimate smile that had captured her heart in a crowded ballroom a decade ago. "I'm very glad she did." "So am I," Genevieve whispered. "So am I."